The God Trip, a DMT trip report sent in by Great Home Greens, originally from Reddit. Let me preface this by saying I had thought I had already had a spiritual awakening, but this was like that times 100. This has to be the craziest trip I've ever been on, and from how I see it now, the last trip I will ever need to go on for the purpose of seeking information. It had been a while since I tripped, and I kept feeling more and more called over the last couple of days to do it. Specifically, because I was working out some ideas on how to picture the structure of the universe based on my previous trips and what I had seen, I have strong memories of seeing these ever-changing 4D beings that gave me the impression that our observable universe was a 3D cross-section of a 4D item. I loaded approximately 40mg of DMT into a bong, sandwiched in between about half a bowl of weed. I lit it carefully with the flame as far back as possible and tried to smoke it as slowly as I could without losing the cherry. It took 2 full hits to clear the bowl. The first hit seemed like mostly weed, but the second hit was lots of DMT. I held it in both times until there was no more smoke, and when I exhaled, the second time everything started to go through that familiar but foreign change. I never really feel like I blast off per se. Most times I just go through a sort of fade out of reality. It's like everything starts to look and feel more and more foreign until I am suddenly no longer a body, and my consciousness is fully there. I was greeted by the exact being I had been thinking about. To me, it does not seem like the typical entity that I read about in other people's trip reports, but more like a sentient mass of constantly changing 3-dimensional objects. I was so excited to see it, and I began trying to ask if it was the source of my 3D reality like I had been thinking. As I excitedly tried to remember and ask the questions I had, I wasn't presented with answers as much as just a feeling to look closer. So I tried really hard to observe and remember the details of what I was looking at. Focusing closer on what I was looking at, I was immediately struck with just how complex this thing really was. From a distance, it appeared to be almost shaped like a wave, or maybe I could more accurately call it a flailing funnel or tornado-like tunnel with a constantly changing surface made out of seemingly every shape. I remember seeing gears, propellers, eyes, people, figures, animal figures. All the shapes would move and dance and stay around as long as they were observed, but disappear instantly when they were in the foreground. The shapes seemed to get big enough to see them when I observed them, but shrink away when I didn't. It seemed like just by looking at it, I could zoom in on its surface and observe it closer. As I zoomed in, I noticed the whole thing that seemed chaotic from a distance was actually a perfectly structured fractal, but not like any fractal I had ever seen before. This was made entirely out of 3D objects instead of lines. It was almost like what looked like the lines of this fractal were actually made out of the timelines of each of the 3D objects inside it. By looking at any part of it, it was like I was able to look at a small part of it in time. It's like what looked like a line was actually a moving film reel or a zoetrope rotating to create motion that played out each frame of the image at every point of itself. As soon as my focus would shift, each object would melt back into the fractal and be replaced by new objects in the centre of my focus doing the same types of things. The amount of depth to this thing is completely indescribable to the human mind. Even now picturing it and writing this is so hard because I can only remember as much as my limited brain can comprehend. I could feel that the being could tell I was observing it closer, and trying desperately to get some answers. I was now even more convinced that what I was seeing was a far more complex version of what I would normally see as reality. Like I was somehow outside of time and this was the 4D fractal physical version of it. Suddenly, I also had this immediate understanding of how people saw such crazy things on a breakthrough, because I could tell that when looking at this object I could literally see anything. It's like I understood the mechanisms of how a DMT trip worked. How if I was a little bit closer to this, I would maybe fall into one of those timelines and see something crazy. Once I understood this, I heard, "Ask and you shall receive." And I got plucked entirely out of the realm with this being and pulled up to what my brain can only try to describe as possibly the highest observable dimension of reality. I was immediately awestruck, dumbfounded, filled with joy, horrified and amazed all at once. I was at the centre of it all. The DMT had told me before about the source of all creation, but I hadn't seen it. I knew now more than I knew anything else that this is where and what that centre was. I've tried to describe what I was looking at. It seems like I can fully remember it, but the memory has to have been modified to fit my perception, since truly describing what I saw or even perceiving it from my current viewpoint would be like a brick trying to describe how to build itself into a wall. I was looking at what seemed to be a beautifully constructed platform in the very centre of an equally beautiful and complex multicoloured ocean. The ocean was not flat, but one of those massive sphere-like structures where the top and bottom points curve back inward, to create a tunnel through the middle. The platform was in the very centre of this middle tunnel structure, and standing on it was what I can only describe as a robed figure, with kind of a golden looking wise and loving but mostly indescribable face. Its arms were stretched upwards and out, and its feet were together, and the tunnel emanated out of the top of the robed figure's hands, creating this entire ocean, and was then reabsorbed into the bottom of the platform up through its feet. The entire ocean seemed to be constructed like one of the fractal beings from earlier, but so much further zoomed out. At this level, it was even more complex than when I had been trying to observe the earlier being. The entire ocean was so brightly coloured and flowed constantly. Every colour possible made up each fractal wave, and they all seemed to contrast each other so much more than any colours I had ever seen. From here, any point I looked I could see entire universes being born, and destroyed in each point I focused my attention, instead of mere 3D objects. Some of these universes were very simple, some just as complex as ours, some beyond my imagination. I could see that this was truly everything, and that the entire universe that humans know is just a single thought in a sea of infinite thoughts, seemingly created and destroyed in an instant just for fun. I felt so overwhelmed, but equally thankful for this blessed knowledge. I felt like I now knew everything. I was so overwhelmed, and it was so much to take in, and the robed figure seemed like it was highly amused because I had asked for this. Don't know exactly how long I stayed in this place. It felt so amazing, yet so far beyond my little existence. When I finally started coming back, I could see clearly as I fell back into this sea and towards my base reality. I started slowly getting smaller and smaller, starting to come back down through different complex realities, like landing on an interdimensional aeroplane. Then at some point I could see our wave, then our universe, then the earth, and then my room, as I was placed back into my body. The roof seemed to close in on me, and I could see something waving goodbye as it did. Felt like I got placed back into a box and then the lid got put on. The smooth transition into my body made all of this seem even more real than it already did. As I continued to come down, I could still fully understand what I'd been shown and the significance and weight of it. As soon as I had some control over my body, I started screaming. Not out of fear, but just because I was so completely overwhelmed that it was involuntary. I screamed with no words for a while, and then gained a tiny bit of complexion and got up and started screaming, "I'm not supposed to know this! I was just supposed to live my life!" I had never felt so free yet so insignificant at once. It's like I know way more than any human is supposed to know. The video game character realising it's a video game character. I can see now that everything that happens here doesn't matter whatsoever at all, and yet we still exist for a reason. This is all just something to experience for a moment. Possibly to fulfill some cosmic purpose, possibly to balance something out, possibly to entertain someone, possibly to just fill a gap in infinity. We could be a rerun for all I know. All I know now is this. I'm no longer afraid of anything at all. When I die, it will be like a death in a play or a movie, simply to create the emotions all those watching are supposed to feel, simply to deepen the illusion of this experience itself. When I die, I don't have to reincarnate, because I am already everywhere. I died today. A 70 to 100mg DMT trip report, posted to the DMT subreddit by Physics 4 years ago. The past few weeks of my life have been leading up to this very moment I met Dimitri yesterday afternoon. It all started with an acid trip involving close friends, dabs, and nitrous oxide. These combinations somehow allowed us to accidentally access the astral plane, or the DMT realm, conscious stream, whatever you want to call it. All of these trips just lead to the same place. This place. I've been researching and studying DMT for years now, and I never assumed the day would actually come that I had any. It started when our friendly onion farm delivered my order of very pure onions. I'm talking bright yellow. The listing said 90 to 95% pure, washed once for cleanliness. The smell of mothballs became overly stimulating as soon as the package was opened fully. The most accurate way I can describe the smell of smoked DMT is literally a burning grandpa. Using our shitty little weed scale, we attempted to shakily weigh out the first dose, my dose. But the scale was not as touchy as we expected, so the real dose I and my two friends took is really unknown. Factoring into the melted DMT left in the banger after each of our hits only caused the next person in line to get higher and higher doses. We didn't put much thought into the dosage, because my thinking was this: if I'm gonna do it, I might as well fucking do it. And that's precisely what I did. With music on, and two good friends watching me, they fed me my whole dose in one go. I held it all in, laid back, and let it happen. And I'm being entirely honest when I say that those first few minutes were absolutely bone-chillingly terrifying. While I was quick to let go, and actually break free from prior experience in different trips, meditation, and astral projection, the lead up to this was far too much. I've never felt a more pure fear before the rush of every emotion, human and non-human, being pumped into my mind. I knew that what I was feeling was death, in all certainty. It felt only like my emotional ceiling or cap was reached. And then, it shattered through the top and exploded. And that is when I became the universe itself. I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. I saw geometric patterns so large my eyes couldn't fathom them. And I felt the presence the whole trip of entities that my brain interpreted as the people closest to me in my life. It left me with a strong sense of love and belongingness for the whole experience. And before it even really started, it was over. But without a doubt in my mind, I know that I broke through, and I've taken many, many lessons from the experience. You, reading this right now, is simply the universe experiencing itself. There is no God in the sense of Christianity, but rather a collection of infinite gods. These gods are simply other souls just like yours, that have reached the end of their reincarnative process and have permanently ascended to the greater picture. All religions have the right grounds and main ideas. They're just interpreted differently by different cultures and walks of life. For real though, research the similarities between all existing religions. They are far more plentiful than you can imagine. These almighty powerful beings that you meet are the same genetic structure as you and me. Humans are a race with amnesia, in the sense that all of this knowledge is deep within you. It's not to be found in other places of consciousness or through intense research, but those things can get you really close to the big idea, as I've learned. But it's found truly when you deeply know yourself, for a lack of better words. I always had a hunch on my purpose in life, but now it couldn't be more clear. My soul is on this earth, in this reality, for me to channel my inner knowledge and spirituality, if you will, into a form of expression to teach, heal, and inspire others that are on the same path as me. When you finally break through, you are shown that the universe's events are as predetermined as the sun rising tomorrow morning. Once you fully realise this, it really changes your view on life for the best. Finally, I feel like a complete person. I don't know if this is the last and only time I'll try DMT, because I feel like I got all the answers I needed. But I would love to hear anyone's thoughts or experiences and just talk about life, the universe, everything. Because they are all one and the same, and I can promise that. A 500mg DMT trip report, sent in by a subscriber. As I write this, I'm 26 years old. I'm currently sober from everything, as I am an addict and alcoholic. I admit this freely and feel no shame about it. I do not find I can use drugs or alcohol, or even psychedelics in a way that is conducive or productive. This may change in time, but I'm not in a rush to experiment again. Feel free to share this or not. At the time of the trip report, I was age 19. I will go by M. This experience was my very first ever experience of DMT. It holds a very special place in my heart, while also being difficult to contextualise and integrate. This is my first time writing this at length, so I'll ask you to bear with me. I was 19 years old at the time, and the year was 2016. 2016 was a year of extreme highs and extreme lows for me. I'd just received my first criminal charges for a DUI, where I hit another driver while off my face on vodka and crack cocaine, and had lost my licence for 2 years. This will be somewhat relevant to the story later on. I was quite lost at this point in my life. I lived with roommates in an apartment, and I was pretty poor. I'd just started a new job, my first ever job in an office, that I was beginning to despise with every fibre of my being. I was still young and hopeful, yet I felt at odds with myself and my circumstances, and felt I had a very long ways to go to change things. I really didn't know who I was at this point in my life, and my identity, ego, and self-worth was all tied up in the opinions of others and what I had. I knew even at the time that I had the wrong way of looking at things, but I didn't know how to change. I was still growing up and learning about myself, and still am, like everyone else. But I did think I was a bit special or different. These misunderstandings would soon be crushed by the power of DMT. My experience with drugs at the time was quite a bit. Weed, nitrous, LSD, PCP, DXM, mushrooms, cocaine, crack cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, various M-bombs, ketamine, MDMA, MDA, mescaline. Too many narcotic pharmaceuticals to name, but mostly opioids and benzodiazepines as far as pharmaceuticals went. There are probably many more I'm forgetting, but it really doesn't matter. I was also a blossoming IV user at the time. Not actively during the months surrounding the approximate date of this first DMT trip, but before and after. Moving up to the trip itself, I mentioned that I had just started a new job. During the training and orientation for the new job, I made a friend. We will refer to him as F. F was a hippie type, and I wanted to think that I was too, but looking back on things, I wasn't really. It's not important, but the only thing we really had in common was a massive interest in the Grateful Dead and taking psychedelics. I got to finding out pretty quickly in my conversations with F that he was the man to find if you were looking for high quality classic psychedelics. I had never met a strictly psychedelic connect at this point, especially with different options. I usually only knew someone who could only get LSD or only get mushrooms. We quickly became friends, or he saw another potential buyer. Either way, we liked each other and spent time together and talked often. I would say it was maybe 2 weeks into knowing him that he revealed that he could supply me with DMT. He explained that it was synthesized and extracted from acacia confusa bark, which at the time I had no idea what that even meant. He explained that it was some of the most potent DMT he had ever sourced, and that it would absolutely blow my mind to smithereens. Perfect, I thought. Exactly what I need. I had researched DMT at length many times leading up to this, and had friends in the past that told me about it. One of the most true statements one of my friends told me about DMT years prior to this was that whatever you think it's going to be like, it's not that. So, a simple deal was made. F said 1 gram would be $100. It said that it did not sell less than 1 gram at a time, which in retrospect was a bit shady. But in my 19-year-old brain, that was great, because I'd have more for the next time. Little did I know how hesitant I would be to smoke it again after this though. He said he would come by after work and drop it off at my apartment, as he didn't have it with him. I agreed and stopped off at an ATM on my way home from work to withdraw the cash. A few hours later, he arrived. I handed him the money, and he handed me 1 gram of DMT. I ran back inside to look at it, smell it, and figure out the best way to smoke it. In all of my excitement, I realised that I really did not know how to smoke it on my own. I also didn't want to disclose to my roommates at the time what I was about to embark upon. None of them were tripping people, and I had intended to be alone my first time smoking anyway, as it's recommended, and I did not have anyone I deeply trusted in that way. In my doubts, I sent F a text message, asking questions regarding smoking methods. In addition to his suggestions via text and reading on the DMT Nexus website, I felt I was ill-equipped to correctly smoke it, much less on my own. All I had was a shitty weed pipe I bought from a gas station and a Bic lighter. I had no weed, no herb, or any type of plant material to sandwich it, nor did I have any screens. In conversation with F via text, the conversation eventually led to him inviting me over to his home on the coming Saturday night to smoke it. I believe it was either Wednesday or Thursday. The time and work at the office dragged by endlessly leading up to this. Now, I did not realise, until the day of when the plan was to take place, that he lived 45 minutes away from me. Big deal. However, my licence was suspended, so travelling distances like this proved more difficult than thought. I asked F if I could give him gas money and he would pick me up and take me back, which was a ludicrous ask to begin with, as that would be almost 3 hours of driving for him. He declined, to no surprise. I was committed to going through with this, and I called an Uber to pick me up and take me. I arrived at his house around 7 or 8 PM while the sun was setting. His house was a beach house, a less than 5-minute walk from the beach. It was a messy little bungalow with dogs and people coming in and out. I was off put by the level of activity going on and how messy it was. I had no expectation, but I had hoped that it would be quiet and just me and him. However, this was not the case. I was nervous and jittery, yet F could not be bothered. He was high, smoking dabs back to back and eating a salad. He was in no rush to help me enter hyperspace. I sat on his dirty couch, anxiously fiddling and asking pointless questions about the DMT smoking, many of which I already knew the answer to. When F was finally ready, he sat down beside me and laid a massive weed pipe on the coffee table in front of us. He explained we were going to sandwich it by putting a screen in the bottom of the bowl and putting layers of weed and cigarette ash and DMT. What I did not know, or pay attention to, was how much DMT was going to be put into the pipe. In retrospect, with how much research and reading I did regarding the activity, one might think I would have questioned the amount F put into the bowl. I was so nervous and anxious to just do it, that I didn't. Not even once. By the time it was time to finally smoke it, just about half of the 1-gram bag was inside the bowl, layered between weed and cigarette ash. Before lighting all the goodies up, F stood up and walked over to his stereo. He turned on Divine Moments of Truth by Spongel. I had never heard of Spongel, but after tonight, they would have a lifelong fan. It was turned on full blast, and it made me even more nervous. He sat back down and handed me the pipe. I put it to my lips, and he started to hover the flame over the bowl. I could see the DMT begin to vaporize and almost melt. I exhaled all of the air in my lungs and began to inhale slowly and deeply. He stopped lighting, and I held it in for about 20 to 30 seconds. When I exhaled, I already began to panic. He said, "Don't panic, take another hit." It was as if all of the air had been sucked out of the room. In F's house, the ceiling was plank wood, and the cracks in the wood began to take on life forms of their own. His dog was sitting directly in front of me, staring into my eyes intently, as if he was there to enjoy the show. Everything jumped into a visceral clarity I had never experienced before. Not even with high-dose liquid LSD taken intravenously that I had experimented with a couple months before this trip. All of this happens within a couple seconds before the second hit. I begin taking my next hit and hold for about another 10 to 20 seconds. I held it in for less time as the fear began to take hold, and I began shaking and my heart was beating out of my chest. Third hit. About 10 to 20 second hold again. I am leaving this world. I close my eyes and see highly complex multifaceted geometry and mandala-like visions. I open my eyes and the patterns are laid over every surface in the room. F somehow manages to get me to hold the pipe to my lips again, and I take a fourth hit. At this point I am so overwhelmed and flabbergasted, I do not even clearly recall taking a fourth hit. By F's testimony, I laid back onto the couch without even consciously exhaling. He said most of it just blew out of my nose while I laid there with my head tilted back against the couch, and my eyes completely closed, motionless. I should preface this by saying I continued tripping for another 40 minutes approximately after the fourth hit. This is by F's account, and I have no reason to believe otherwise, nor is there any way to confirm or deny. After the fourth hit, I don't exist anymore. Nothing ever did. This was always the state of affairs. The best way I could describe this state would be computer consciousness, if that makes sense. No time, no space, no context. just sounds of blips and bloops, and highly complex geometrical and impossible non-Euclidean shapes. I am moving at light speed, yet completely still. There is no train of thought, or at least for this point of the trip. There are no concepts either. There is no self to assign meaning to anything that was seen. I would describe this possibly as the state of enlightenment or nirvana, as described by Buddhists and Taoists. Everything is nothing. Nothing is everything. I am nowhere and everywhere, and everything and nothing simultaneously. I have become a quark among billions of trillions of other quarks in the universe, completely alone, yet a part of a massive machine with no end or beginning. This state of oneness and ultimate reality goes on for eternity, probably 10 minutes in Earth time though. As I come out of this state, by no means coming down yet, I am inside a world of tumbling blocks. Highly contrasted blocks of yellows and greens tumbling around in a pattern that hurts my brain to think about. All of the edges of these blocks are soft and round. There is something extremely significant about this part. This tumbling block world is followed by rapid fire imagery. Then the scene changes. I see an endless desert, a tree on fire, an underground magenta circuit board city. This state of rapid fire imagery goes on for another few minutes, or so I imagine. During this state, some small sliver of self begins to resurface. I find myself recognizing the impossible images as they flash, trying to say what they are. I imagine F just heard me muttering gibberish in a slightly excited manner. It's like deja vu on crack. It's on the tip of my tongue. I am certain I have been here before. At some point, I start to transition to the part of the trip where I begin to return to my body, but with full ego loss and full DMT visuals. I'm back in F's living room. The dog is in front of me. As far as I know, it's an alien creature with more than 6 eyes peering into my soul. F is there, and he looks like himself as I knew him, but I was still tripping so hard. I couldn't really remember who he was, or where I was for that matter. Also, my vision is only black and white. I became caught in a loop. I don't even recognise during the loop that I am in a loop. There was only ever that moment. There is no past or present. So there I am. Whatever I am. I had no conception of what a human is. In F's living room with his dog, stuck in a loop. I think I am dead. I am dead. The loop goes like this. I look at F and try to speak. He laughs, says something completely incomprehensible, and I look at his dog. I look at his dog, look around the room, which mostly looks like a melting black and white mess of cartoonish soup. And then I look back at F. I try to speak, and the words come out like or something like this. He says something in an alien language, and then I look back at the dog. This loop goes on for eternity. It is not particularly unpleasant, as at this stage I have no context for anything, pleasant or unpleasant. It just is, and it's always been like this. I imagine this part went on for about 7 to 10 minutes in Earth time. Now we get to the final stage of the trip. What I imagine is the final 10 to 15 minutes of the around 40-minute trip total. At some point I start to come out of the loop. Upon exiting the loop, colour returns to my vision. I'm also able to stand and semi-walk around and move my limbs. I find myself trying to have conversations with F, but not in a loop. They're completely non-English, but I believe I am trying to figure out what is going on and exactly what is happening and what happened to my brain. F finds this particularly funny, as I can remember attempting to communicate with him and he just stood there with a 1,000-tooth monstrous grin, laughing hysterically. I don't believe it was in a mean way, more in a I've been there before sort of way. But either way, I'm in a house I don't recognise, with a hippie that I can't place, in a body I didn't understand. Somehow, this transitions to me and F walking outside. There is a thick rainbow gas in the air, like walking through a rainbow fog. The trees, grass, everything is alive and communicating with me. F has the alien dog on a green rope that is also alive, and we begin walking. Well, F is walking, and I'm barely walking. I was in complete awe of nature, stumbling around alongside him. We walk down his street for a few minutes, and things are generally okay, considering my extreme hallucinogenic state. We got to a cross street, and things take a very bad turn in the trip. I'm standing next to F, and he says something to me. Suddenly, tripping me begins to believe a dangerous paranoid theory. The theory is that F and his alien dog have kidnapped my ass somehow, and that I'm now in hell. I can't leave, and this will never end. Keep in mind, I still can't remember my own name, or much less who F even is. Of course, upon this realization, the only logical option is to punch F in the face to escape this nightmare. This is where things get tricky. In my trip, one version of events happen that don't actually happen, of course. And then, of course, what actually did happen. I'll tell the tripping version first. I punch F in the face with all of my might. I connect, laying him flat on the ground. My fist is covered in glossy, vibrant red blood, and F is out cold. I kneel down on the ground and see a strange aura around his body. Also, near his head and face, I see teeth. At first, it's just a few of what I imagined would be, of course, his teeth. It's not just a little bit of chipped tooth, they are full teeth, as if they were extracted in a dental procedure. Now, the teeth begin to multiply. I stand up from my kneeling position, and I look at the pavement around me. There are hundreds of bloody teeth everywhere. They're everywhere. I can see them on the pavement. As I step back, I hear and feel my shoes crunching on them. Then, I begin to hear the voices. Did you see that? He killed him. Shadowy neighbour figures are standing outside of the neighbouring houses. I don't see actual people there, they are more like silhouettes. But the voices I hear are very real. Then, I begin to see red and blue lights coming from around the corner. Pure panic, like I've never felt before, begins to set in. This is it. I'm going to prison for murder. Despite how hard I was tripping, it's odd. I didn't even know I was tripping. That's how hard I was tripping. But I knew that cops and prison were a thing that was coming. I took off running as fast as I could. I'm not proud of my response, as I really hope if I actually killed someone that I would not run, but I would stay and face the consequences of my actions. Anyway, I'm running as fast as I can, and I take off my shirt. It begins pouring with rain. It is nighttime at this point, and I still have no memory of where I am. This part of the trip is easily the most scared I have ever been in my 19 years of life so far. I'm not sure if the fear and panic I experienced here has been topped as of yet. I'm shirtless, blind tripping, running from imaginary cops down the street. I run and run until I cannot run anymore. I come upon another neighbourhood, a gated one. I run up to the little gate box where the gate person that communicates to the cars entering the community sits. She is a middle-aged white woman, wearing a lot of red lipstick. She is immediately off-put by the soaking wet, 6'3" skinny young adult with massive eyeballs walking up to her. She holds her ground, and I say to her, "I need help. I'm afraid I've lost my mind. Can you call an ambulance and have them take me to a mental hospital, please?" This is what I actually said. She says, "No, I can't do that. You have to go somewhere else." "Please, please, I need help," I beg her. "I do not know who I am or where I am. I've lost my mind." "I'm very sorry. I cannot help you, young man," she says. I walk off in the direction I came from, completely and utterly defeated. I continue walking aimlessly. My faculties, however, slowly begin to return to me as I walk. I get an idea, maybe, that I have something with me so I can figure out who I am and what's going on. Maybe I have something in my pockets, a clue to point me in the right direction, out of this hell. I check my back pockets first. Empty. I check my front pockets, and there was only one thing in my left pocket. A bag with half a gram of DMT in it. The greatest feeling of relief washed over me. I realised I'm on DMT right now. I finally remembered that I smoked DMT earlier tonight. I began laughing. The best laugh I've ever laughed. I realised I was probably imagining certain things that may not be true. I still believed I either killed or seriously injured a man earlier, however. With my head starting to get into a semi-sober place, I continued walking the way I ran away from the murder. That's when I see F's house. I run directly into the house to find F with a few of his other friends sitting around. Upon entering the house, they all jump out of the chairs and say, "Oh my god, he's back." I look at F and start crying. I run over and hug him and say, "I'm so glad you're alive. I thought I'd killed you." He says, "What? Killed me?" I say, "Yes, I punched you in the face. You've just fucking died. Your teeth were everywhere." F and his friends fall out laughing hysterically. You didn't even make contact," F explains. "You swung the sloppiest, slowest punch I've ever seen. I moved out of the way and you proceeded to freak the fuck out screaming, and then you ran away into the rain out of sight. I had my dog with me and you ran away so fast, I found it pointless to chase you. I figured you would come down at some point and come back." I was shocked to hear this, but relieved. After this revelation, we sat on the front porch and smoked a bunch of weed and cigarettes. I cried tears of joy and love. I couldn't believe the experience I had just had, and I couldn't be happier to be back in my body and right mind. Me and F were friends for years after this, and had a few more trips, and he was my main supplier of all things psychedelic. We lost contact after I got sober and moved to a different state. I will never forget this night and this trip. After this trip, I awoke to many truths. That life implies death. That self implies other. I began to feel my own existence as absolutely fundamental. We are all the fabric of existence itself. We are all interdependent upon each other. I am you, you are me. We are all each other. Faces of God. Nothing is separate, and there are no separate events. We are all in one continuous moment, experiencing each other forever. There is no self. Everything is one. These things have been said, and it can almost be a bit cliché to say them, but after that night, I have never found more comfort and truth in the understanding that we are all one, the universe experiencing itself. Some afterthoughts. I really do not know what F was thinking giving anyone that much DMT, much less for their first trip. I had many DMT trips after this, but none as intense and insane as this one was. Reality is God tripping balls, and DMT is the ultimate trip stopper. A post by an unknown user on the Psychonaut subreddit 3 years ago. I tried DMT for the first time a few days ago, and holy smokes, I was blown away. I'll write a real and in-depth trip report at some point, but for the time being, I'd love to share a realization and piece of insight I had from my experience. What hit me the strongest was that despite never trying DMT before, I'd actually already been there. I'm uncertain about nearly everything in life, yet I'm certain that wherever I was, it felt like home in a weird way. At one point during the trip, I realised I was back home. I couldn't understand where I'd been this whole time. I was outside of time and space, in the emptiness where I'd always been. Amidst the total chaos, I suddenly heard a comforting voice tell me that I've always been here. It's been me this whole time. Although this voice was speaking at me, it was heavily implied that this voice was in fact myself. Not the limited self per se, separated by the physical body, but the deep down me that transcends the material world. Suddenly, it dawned upon me. Reality is the trip or dream, and DMT is the trip stopper. I'll be using the word God here, but I simply mean that as a metaphor for the ineffable mystery of existence, or the deep down reality, whatever that means. When we smoke DMT, God, who is all of us, wakes up from the dream of life. Initially, he's confused, until he finds himself once again. He found himself when he told me that I've been here this whole time. It had been there this whole time. It had just been dreaming that it was an earthworm and a butterfly, and a silly human being that I am right now. I've been meditating and practicing yoga for a couple years now, after I, with total humility, had my awakening experience a few years ago. The realization I had on DMT wasn't anything new, just another example of directly experiencing my true nature. Nothing is as beautiful as this cosmic oneness. I like to compare a spiritual awakening to God lucid dreaming. God discovers himself in us. Life is so insanely beautiful, and I hope we can all get better at not losing touch of the utter magic and wonder that permeates every moment. I love you all so much. A DMT and methamphetamine trip report, posted to RDMT by the user Zovak. So I'm an almost daily user of intravenous methamphetamine. It has been my drug of choice for the last 4 years. I'm 31 years old currently. Prior to my meth use, I was mainly a pothead, and would do psychedelics once every couple of months. Now, I've always liked to push the limits of any substance I used. I'd smoke a quarter oz of weed a day. I'd do 10-gram plus mushroom trips, 20 hits of LSD at once, and I've candy flipped and hippie flipped many times, and done ketamine and cocaine. And now with meth, I'll easily shoot a half-gram or better at a time. No matter what it was or how much I did, I was always comfortable and under control of myself. I never had any issues with psychosis or delusions, and I was always grounded firmly in reality. So naturally, when I first had the opportunity to try DMT for the first time, I was pumped, and went in head first. My first experience was with a vape cart, and I took 5 full lung hits, holding them for 10 seconds each, and even though I was blasting into hyperspace by the third, I still made the 4th and 5th happen. I had the full breakthrough experience, the instant chrysanthemum of colours and geometry wading through my vision, followed by a hum rising from silence to a deafening roar, my consciousness coming out of myself as an entity danced in 4th dimensional motions. It beckoned me forth, surrounded and pervaded by what I can best describe as prismic light bent into tubes folding in on themselves like a tesseract. I looked down and see the way that my soul was interfacing with my body, almost as if I was looking at the inside of a mask I had pulled from my face. I remained here until I returned to my body, still tripping harder than any acid trip, yet feeling sober due to the large drop-off from where I was. I immediately lost my fear of death, and achieved an inner peace I had long been searching for. It was in that moment that I fell in love with DMT, and began to use it very often. Now I had continued to achieve breakthroughs with my use, but it wasn't every time, and actually became less frequent the more I used. And on the occasions I would have a good breakthrough, It always seemed like it was less intense or less long lasting than the first couple times, so I started chasing it more. Looking back, I do think now that I was being denied entry on many occasions, whether it be for my other drug use interfering, or because I needed to reflect on what I was supposed to have learned and wasn't doing so. One morning after being up all night shooting meth, I decided to try and shoot DMT. Little did I know, because of lack of research, that DMT freebase isn't water soluble, so my attempt didn't work, and it just left me with DMT stuck in a syringe. I go to sleep after this, and when I wake, I prep a shot of meth. It's in the rig with the DMT in it, and I don't really remember or think about the DMT itself. As it turns out, meth in solution with water can dissolve DMT and bring it into solution as well. And when I hit my shot, which this one, if I had to guess, was about 0.2 of a gram of meth and maybe 50 milligrams of DMT, I was taken by surprise when, after the characteristic cough that comes along with shooting meth, I immediately felt the pull into hyperspace. And it was strong. Almost instantly, I bypassed the first initial stages and was completely out on the astral plane. By this point, it was one of the best breakthroughs I've ever had. Crystal clear, very distinct, very strong visions and sensations. And when I came back, I was eager to step it up. And me being me, decided I was going to do it again. For science. But with the knob turned to 10. So just maybe an hour or two later, I prep another shot. This time I put a 1/4 gram of DMT in the barrel, and just the barest amount of meth that I can use to make it dissolve, which is about 50 milligrams. I decided I didn't want any distractions with this one, so I go and I sit in the bathroom, alone, door closed and noise cancelling earbuds in. I was going to be giving this my full attention. So I get the needle in my vein, and I begin to push. In solution, the shot was right at 50 units. I push it all the way to about 10 units left to go, and my vision gets hit so hard that I immediately ripped the needle out of my arm and threw it to the ground. Before I even saw it hit the floor, I was racing at light speed through hyperspace. I can only remember a few distinct details. The first is that it was so intense and overwhelming that I lost all touch with reality. Not only did I lose my sense of self, but I lost every concept of existence, and each and every one of my senses was gone. I had what I could only describe as a breakthrough out of a breakthrough. Where we normally go when we break through, I was there for a fleeting moment, before pushing past it into a black void. I could only describe this as hell. Although, I was in this black emptiness, there was this sinister energy there laughing at me, watching my torment, amused by my utter confusion and fear. And I was here for an extremely long time. What brought me back to reality first was my sense of touch. I reached out and felt my chest with one hand and my head with the other, and as soon as I felt them, I gripped a death hold on both, afraid to let go, as if I might lose myself again had I done so. I then opened my eyes and was still underneath a sea of acid-like visuals, still with no concept of self or any concept of what was around me. I felt small and stupid, as if I was a human now forced into the body and mind of an ant. It took me 5 to 10 more minutes of sitting there staring at my feet, drooling on myself, for basic understanding of anything beginning to return. And then, slowly things came back. But as they came back, all I could think or feel was how utterly strange and stupid existence as a human being is. The fact that we all have to eat and drink and sleep and piss and shit and fuck and come and breathe is so alien and gross to me, as I remember each one existing. And then I realised how self-centred and egotistical we all are, with how weird and gross and small we truly are. This was all very difficult to swallow, until it quickly began to normalise as I returned to baseline once again. I was left with an extreme appreciation that I made it back. I made it back alive, and I'm not only alive, but that I am myself, and then I still have time to be myself for now. I've been sober ever since that moment. I've gone cold turkey off everything. And not because of fear, but because there is no longer any drive within me to use anything. Just being alive and being myself, my sober self, is what I truly desire in my heart now. Now I feel like in the future, I may use drugs again, and I may even do DMT again, but I will never do it to that extreme that I did that day. However, for now, I am content and I am at peace. I will say, I don't recommend anybody do what I did, but if you do for some reason, just know that going into it will be a completely life-altering experience, one that someone even as mentally strong and experienced as myself almost didn't come back from. So do this at your own risk. The Octopus, a DMT trip report posted by the user Blackclow to the DMT Nexus on the 2nd of November 2006. Hey guys, I've found this rather intense DMT trip report from another forum. It's pretty wild. I packed the pipe with weed, and then on the dope, I placed with my brother's miniature pocket knife blade what I thought to be a little bit of the brown crystally goo, about 3 match heads worth. I torched carefully above the cone and sucked for all it was worth. Firstly, before anything, I noticed that my head had disappeared. Well, rather it was more like it no longer had boundaries as such. Then, the ringing in my ears and the hideous rush of a vascular headache occurred. The ringing deepened and became richer, louder. Then, a great bell tolled. Ask not for whom it tolls. A terrified attempt to calm myself failed miserably, as the vibration shattered me into an infinitum. I was still sitting there in the garden, so I knew I could go further. Lacking bodily coordination, I dumped roughly half of what I had left on the foil. I had been told it was a gram, the whole thing. Put this on a similar cone to the first, and repeated the torching. This time, because I could no longer tell if I possessed lungs, I must have pulled down the whopper of a hit, and what happened next is very hard to describe. The fear went up 1,000 notches. My knuckles, if I still had them, would have certainly been white, like the light that was consuming my whole body. Blazing white light all around. Fortunately, the headache subsided with the second hit, and I felt ready to extend my senses to feel where I was and what was happening. I remembered the veil, like rubber, or the surface of jelly stretched in front of me. There were no geometric patterns, a few weird fractals burnt like green fire from every surface I could see in the garden. I was in 2 places at once. It was so odd. And there was this veil like the surface of some deep pond before me. Then, something moved beyond it. Was that some sort of dorsal fin? I leaned forward to touch the surface of the membrane, and then what happened next, I swear, nearly killed me from its sheer bizarrity. From behind the white chair, or was it from inside it, a creature emerged. It was not a happy, smiley elf. To tell you the truth, I will not describe what I saw. It had innumerable tentacles. It was like a cross between some weird octopus or jellyfish. And the eyes. Oh my god, the eyes. I froze on the spot thinking, shit, this is it. I've really gone and done it now. Fucking toast. I never believed. I really should have believed. And now I'm at the mercy of something much, much bigger and complex, and clever, and definitely more malevolent than myself. I asked it its name, although I wish I had not asked. Its voice utterly destroyed me. It was like being caught in a storm of psychic noise, a whirlwind of deadly electrical shrapnel. think I shuddered and started to drool uncontrollably at this point. I think I also urinated in my jeans. With its innumerable eyes, it gazed at me steady and extended a tendril. At that same moment, it fired a beam of light directly between and above my eyes. The alien laser was pinkish green. It hurt. I begged it to stop. I whimpered, "Please stop. You're hurting me. I'm just fragile. Please be careful. I'm sentient as well. I mean you no harm." It seemed to consider what I had to say for a brief moment. The laser was withdrawn, but the tendrils, of which there were more now, still held me in place. I was trying to make out details of its shape or structure, but the closer I looked, the more it slipped away from me. It seemed to tell me in some weird non-verbal fashion not to struggle, and to stop making noise with my eyes. I personally took this to mean, be calm, do not struggle, clear your head, see, but do not look. It then became a little clearer. It seemed to be cloaked in some way. Some sort of organic hood and covering was wrapped around it. Some sort of armour or protection. The tentacles had no substance as we know it, and the eyes, well, they were the most awe-inspiring and terrifying things I have ever beheld. They defied counting. They defied reason. This whole thing was too much, and I felt myself losing my mind. I just lost it. Gone. I can't recall all that much after this, except it rifling through my mind like it were a chest of drawers. Some rewiring took place. An awesome amount was uploaded to my cortex, and a sensation not unlike being at the dentist while being semi-conscious from nitrous. This sense of voices telling you it'll be all over soon, and that you've done really well. Really well. Hush, hush now. Then, when I was able, and the pinkish-greenish light was withdrawn, I felt I could once again move. The creature had split into three, or maybe it had always been three, and there were several smaller blobs that were crawling around my feet. They seemed to be trying to sneak up on me. Fuck that, I thought, and kept a close eye on them, lest they molest me like their larger, scarier accomplice. It was at this point that I realised that the blobs were not the same as the other creature or creatures. They were entirely different, extremely tricky and fast-moving. One of them crawled up my leg and sat on my knee. Frankly, I was too horrified and fascinated to stop it. I noticed it had a little hat. It had little stripy white and green trousers as well, and pointy, curly shoes. But at this point, let's just say I wasn't at home anymore. They seemed friendly enough, and I let them crawl inside my nose and ears and chest and legs and, well, whatever it was they wanted to enter. Eventually, it all faded, and further attempts to enter the world were prohibited. It seemed I'd been barred for now. Just a headache and a sensation of, no. Okay, just typing that out has made me feel all weird, and I need a stiff drink after that. Thank you, and good night. Oh, but before I go, I must say that, no, I had not read many DMT trip reports prior to this. This is what I truly find disturbing about it all. Frankly, I do not require another's belief that this really happened to me. I can barely get my head around it myself. Why elves? Why elves, damn it? And what's with the Philip K. Dick type entity? I swear, I had not been exposed to those particular stories before this experience. Meeting the Mother God, a DMT trip report by Vonnie, uploaded to Erowid October 27, 2017. I'm sure that whatever I try to write down will be a fairly cheap description of what a DMT breakthrough is like, and anyone who has had one will be able to agree right off the bat. They probably don't even need to read what I have to say, because they've been there already. There is no explaining it, not in words. There have been so many little sayings that you hear, like DMT finds you, meeting God, your creator. If you're not sure whether or not you broke through, you haven't. The second of these statements is particularly true. I'd obtained a bit of the stuff because I'd really wanted to try it, but I can't say that I was in any way prepared to be confronted with what I found down there. I say down there because for me it's just easier. I would say I was mentally more prepared than a lot of people who first try it. I wasn't approaching this as any kind of party drug or recreational high. I did get exactly what I came for though. I just didn't know it back then. First few tries was kind of with whack equipment and the stuff just kind of burnt, and I got some neat visuals and even had what I thought was a deep experience, where I more or less was able to experience emotions I wasn't familiar with, and met a very friendly fat furry cat as well. Also, those first 2 times I tried it, I did have a bit of guidance, etc., but that was a parlour game compared to the breakthrough. The difference with the breakthrough hit was that I had a generally more positive experience in the actual taking of the substance. It was much more enjoyable and not so acrid and disgusting as the first 2 times. This was because my delivery this time was a glass pipe and a nice fat flame on an electric lighter. I used about 30 milligrams each time, because supposedly you can back the dosage off in this pipe. I also had to reload the pipe for a second hit of that thick, milky smoke, because the first time it completely took me by surprise, and I spat a fair bit of it out. On the second drawing of the pipe, where it was just starting to vaporise, I was already breathing in and feeling very spinny and disorientated, and kind of getting those odd colours that kind of permeate from everything, and the whirring siren in the ears. And then it went, and I was well and truly on my way. The incredible thing I can say is just how layered the experience was. I recorded myself for about 20 or 30 minutes afterwards trying to explain it to my girlfriend, but probably just came across as a bit of a loony. On the topic of layering, what I found incredibly profound was how strong and able to handle more information you become. When people say that it's over very quickly, maybe it is, because I haven't done it again since writing this. Maybe you become more familiar or more able to navigate the space, but on that first voyage, it really did feel like an eternity. Everything was just right, and I was pulled away from the mind that I was communing with just at the right time. How I would describe the thing in its entirety was layers of an onion that got bigger instead of smaller. Just immense space and knowledge and understanding of the science and geometry and mathematics and physical properties of an entire universe. An incredible godlike surge of knowledge and control of everything I was taking in. But that was only granted to me once I became intimate with the entity or the guide in that place. To describe it as controlling that certain reality is maybe wrong. I think a better word is an understanding that everything that happened to that reality was eventually going to be okay. I had no scores to settle. Just an entirely enveloping understanding of the space you were in, and then you hadn't even come into the relationship with the entity of that dimension yet. For those that have had warm experiences with their mothers, that feeling of complete acceptance and total trust and warmth, and everything happy and confronting and non-ego about that relationship we have with our mothers, well, that is magnified indefinitely. I had that instant relationship and knowing with the entity I encountered, the second it peeled back another layer and showed me the reality that was behind the one I saw and understand had just been shown. And by shown, it was as if I became so aware of that dimension that I was completely in tune and able to understand the way things happened down to the last detail in that new place. I try not to make it sound as though it just makes you feel powerful. It completely didn't. It just totally humbled me. I was then shown the nature of the next reality, and the next, each one becoming exponentially more amazing and perfect, and completely non-contrived. It was like an infinite meditation, with something that permeated every possible dimension, and every possible outcome or thought that could potentially exist in any universe that a being could even have the capacity to think of being possible, even in the depths of their deepest spiritual experiences. That last bit was an attempt at illustrating the layering that I felt. Everything I did, every time I met God, it was a life-changing experience that went far beyond words. And then I met him more. More and more of them was revealed to me. It was the same mind, but I simply went deeper into that communion with it. For me, this is a bad movie review that completely skips the plot. I met so many layers of this thing, and each time, I felt that utter God bond, and that's why I can only describe it as being completely and utterly infinite. The thing that I was last experiencing when I started coming out of it was what I could only describe as a deep, dark blackness with purple lines barely visible on the sides of my vision. The lines were almost like patterns of a waterfall, except very neat and mathematical and understandable. That was just kind of its overflow of those lines. It was like maybe staring into a drain as it empties and seeing the water rippling and flowing on the sides. The purple shapes I saw were of no consequence compared to the blackness that I was exchanging emotions with. I felt like I had come all the way out to Bowser's Castle, or the Emerald City, all the way into the depths of the Matrix. But I knew that this could have almost just kept going. Now that I think of it, it could have gone on forever. Given how much of that feeling that I had with every layer I experienced, I'm sure it could have just gone on endlessly. All the same entity, but all different dimensions that it can conceive of. Obviously, the language of the whole thing was in geometric shapes. That's sort of how I was communicated with. I had an incredibly deep understanding of what I was being shown, because each layer or dimension would show me how to speak the mathematical and physical language of that particular reality. In terms of visuals, here's how I would put it. Each time I could have tried to visualise what was happening in a way that made sense to an outside listener. I might have said, which was, by the way, one strong visual I got, fat fluffy cat in a yellow raincoat. That description of that being in particular was only one possibility in that reality. So by that logic, the Loch Ness Monster does exist simply because we have thought of it. The thought of it exists in our universe. Therefore, any kind of material object or thing that you visualised at a certain layer of the experience was only one stray possibility that could have emerged in the imagination of somebody in that entire universe. At least that's how my feelings were on it. It wasn't some freak show with these far-out creatures. It was being shown entirely new realities where those particular apparitions might only exist in the mind of some creature, or that the physical laws of that reality would allow for that thought to arise within it. Hearing a lot more people's experiences has been cool as well, but all I see honestly is people having trouble expressing themselves, just as I am right now. Even the ones who do this stuff a lot, and try to talk about it a lot, have real dramas even describing the first atom in one of these realities that you completely synchronise with, let alone being able to express what it's like to be able to actually walk the yellow brick road and meet the thing behind the curtain. This whole experience was so utterly moving and humbling and empowering, and just plain over the top crazy, I could talk about it for years. I think this is what I've been looking for so long. Here are some closing remarks I said as I was coming down and trying to make some kind of sense of what had just happened to my consciousness. 1. They need to have DMT journalists. 2. It makes you aware of your own reasoning. 3. Can you create something in your own mind that you are totally unfamiliar with? The thumbnail for today's video was painted by Beth, a follower of mine. She's got her own Instagram and everything, and I'm going to link it in the description, so you best check it out. Thanks once again, Beth, for sending this over to me. I really liked your piece, and I'd like to feature more in the future. Going Home and Coming Back. A DMT trip report by Corey, uploaded to Era with December 4th, 2013. My first breakthrough experience with dimethyltryptamine was the most profound altered state of consciousness I've ever experienced in my days thus far. More intense than all my long-duration psychedelic tryptamine and phenethylamine experiences combined. Most of my psychedelic experiences have had moments, even hours of out-of-body properties to them, when one induced a trance-like state or practiced meditation, but I also have the ability to come back to my body at will in these states with compounds such as psilocybin, LSD or 4-ACO DMT. The reality that DMT imposes upon the explorer is further from conventional reality, and any psychedelic reality that I've ever experienced and the amount of meaning it instilled in me left me confused, full of wonder, and reminded me how much I don't know about time, space and existence. I participated in the extraction of this compound and a laundry list of other alkaloids belonging to the mimosa root bark, and was quite satisfied with the outcome and purity of the material. White and crystalline, an extreme indicator of high quality DMT. The correlation between DMT and visualization of dreams, birth, near-death experiences, and even death itself fascinated me to no end, and the undeniable safeness of this compound made me even more comfortable in exploring. The only thing my array of psychedelic experience prepared me for with this experiment was the acceptance of what's going on, and the idea of losing control of my body, in a mind-body separation sense. Most DMT experiences are inexplicable in a sense, even more so than a normal psychedelic experience, but I will try to put the unspeakable into words. 50 mg of DMT was loaded into an oil burner in order to vaporize the material, and my companion was equipped with a torch burner to help me ingest. I held the oil burner in my mouth and watched as he vaporized the compound. It instantly melts into a puddle of slightly yellow tinted yet transparent liquid, and the oil burner fills with vapor. I slowly inhale, and 2 seconds in I can feel a body high reminiscent of large amounts of marijuana. He continues to vaporize, and by the second toke, I can feel my body wanting to fly away. Everything is shaking in my visual field. Exquisite alien patterns manifest themselves everywhere. The walls, the carpet, my arms, my legs, they all have this beautiful hue that instilled the feeling of being in tune with everything. Along with my ego, the room and all the material inhabitants are dissolving from reality. Everything in my field of vision has transformed into one beautiful and perfectly geometric dimension. I've never witnessed such a profound change in reality with any psychedelic, and this is the first time I've experienced the dissolvement of actual things in my field of vision. They were no longer there. The patterns don't seem familiar to anything my sense organs have ever perceived before, but I am engulfed in this amazing feeling of nostalgia, and I am aware I've experienced this before, somehow. By the third toke, I can only see my friend in front of me. He's no longer an embodiment of everyday reality. As I look at him, I observe a warm smile. I am baffled at the amount of raw beauty and energy pouring out of him. Something happened in these few seconds before my mind completely let go of my body. Some sort of contact with an entity that used the person in front of me as a mediator. No words, no English, just feelings instilled into me from another place, and I could feel that it was coming from him. Everything is okay. Try not to be astonished by this. Don't give in to astonishment. You're going home. Pay attention to what we show you. Not hearing, but feeling these instructions instilled laughter into my psyche. I couldn't understand how one could not be amazed by any of this, but I sat and waited, like an interested child in grammar school, very attentive. About 15 seconds have passed at this point, from first toke to observing the visual world, to the meditation. During my fourth toke, the torch burner fails to light, and my buddy quickly grabs a normal lighter and ignited the oil burner. It explodes with smoke and vapour, and before I can finish inhaling, I feel myself leaving my body, floating upward at first, and then being violently pushed through what most DMT explorers refer to as hyperspace. The music being played in the room, which was beautifully melodic and extremely emotional, paralleled where I was perfectly. The music never sounded distorted or extremely enjoyable in an LSD or psilocybin auditory experience sense. It was as if reality was kind of showing me the beauty in its raw form. Though the music didn't sound different at all, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced from an auditory and emotional point of view. I could tell my mind was in a different place in respect to my body, because the music definitely sounded distant, as if it was coming from a completely different place. The vortex or tunnel I was flying through was filled with the most beautiful geometric patterns and grids. I travelled past these things too quickly to even take the time to observe anything. The amount of beauty in this place was unbelievable. I could feel my inner self, what I've gotten a glimpse of through psychedelic and meditation experience, more immensely than I ever thought possible. I was experiencing eternity, and it couldn't have been more ravishing or meaningful. As the song is dwindling to an end, I realise I'm coming back to my body, just as rapidly as I left it. I open my eyes, and watch things pop back into conventional reality very quickly. First the TV, then the laptop, then everything. My friend has left the room, unbeknownst to me, and he enters from his restroom door right as I glance in that direction. He is smiling and looking at me with a feeling of understanding, knowing where I just went. I'm in complete awe of the experience. I cannot believe what just happened. The first question I mutter is, the first time I smoked DMT, were you playing that song? He gives me a confused look, because this is the first time I smoked DMT with him, and I smile and say sorry I worded that wrong. I felt like I had experienced all of those moments before. I don't know what to make of this. I look at him and inform him that I feel like crying, and he instructs me to do so. I immediately start crying tears, having to do with every possible emotion one could have. Tears of beauty, tears at what felt like the truth, tears of enlightenment, tears of appreciation for being alive still, and tears for the love being shared in that room. I cried for only a few moments, and told him the beauty of that experience was astonishing, and almost too much to witness. I look up at him after I finish crying, and he has his arms wide open for me with a big smile, and we embrace. Great vibes indeed. As I get up from my sitting position, I feel as if I'm floating, and I make my way to the porch. The scene was beautiful. I enjoyed a cigarette, and then we were off to gift the DMT to a few friends. The rest of that day, I could not get my mind off of what happened. I'm definitely going to revisit this compound. It is just beautiful. Otherworldly Bewilderness. A DMT trip report by SFOS, uploaded to Erowid.org June 15th, 2000. Ever since my first couple times doing DMT, I've had a far more difficult time remembering what happened, and there was a fear that kept me from taking the plunge too often. Both of these were cleared out of me the other night though when I smoked it again amongst new friends. It was once again lucidly available to me via memory, and had the joy of attempting to put words into the unlanguageable. Enjoy. Dose: 50 mg of synthetic DMT in a glass pipe on a small bed of dill, 3 large, hot plasticky tokes. Upon inhalation, the trembling darkness before me crystallised instantly into a shimmering vortex of lime-coloured tessera and began a meticulous implosion in upon itself. Pulses of sinuous electric energy shot along it from behind me, and I could see them disappear down its infinite corridor. Each one came faster and faster and faster, until this typhoon-like tunnel was throbbing with supple supernova pulsations. It was then that I began to accelerate, an auditory drone that seemed to flange at the edges of my being propelling me along. I couldn't believe the breakneck speed with which I was beginning to move, like a proton in a hyperspatial supercollider. The breathtakingly ecstatic sensation of being literally shot out of the confines of my corporeal body was overwhelming, and already my mind was grasping wildly about for some semblance of familiarity. No previous DMT journey had ever moved this fast. The vortex started coiling, and then circling and cycling into its cylindrical self, and I became aware that it was but one strand in a warping and wefting dimension, which was now materialising and taking on 1,000 outlandish forms all around me. Ahead was an entirely ludicrous, tensile, concentric, mandala-like disco medusa that wore about it a technicolor dreamcoat of fibrillating antennae, surrounded by an ultraviolet aura. Instantly I could tell it was alive, some sort of sentinel. Then seemingly out of nowhere, and from every direction at once, came these freakish tentacles of liquid lapis lazuli. They began moving together with an almost orchestral hyper-precision, and I was completely mesmerised. It was like nothing I had ever seen. I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. There must literally have been thousands of them, and I was utterly flabbergasted. I knew I must find a way past this creature though, as extraordinary as she was. We were still cruising along at the speed of light, but now descending backwards together through an amoeboid octahedral gallery of iridescent vaults. It was at this moment that I became suddenly aware we were not alone. The vaults seemed to zoom explosively outward, and then the gallery expanded ad infinitum into a gargantuan, labyrinthian, almost interstellar space, and through every vault poured the miraculous and zany imps who make the tryptamine hyperdimension their home. The tentacles of lapis lazuli gathered these capricious, multicoloured enigmas in towards the centre, and became the architectonic scaffolding of their new multidimensional reality. A world which I found myself dab smack in the middle of. It was like a liquid mind ecology of staggering and alien complexity, as it crosses over into quantum warp drive and migrates even further out into the oceanic beyond. At this point, the glorious geometries transcended what is even vaguely feasible in this three-dimensional mundane space, constantly concreting into new and variegated permutations, exfoliating out of themselves what might be called hyperspherologies of the divine, and to look anywhere was to be shot clean through with scintillating amazement. Crowding and cramming themselves into my field of vision were thousands upon thousands of beings of every imaginable sort, and many that were completely unimaginable. They were everywhere, jabbering in indecipherable tongues, juggling incandescent neon micro-worlds of dancing beings, and morphing with a zen-like diaphanous fluidity that remains a primal miracle no matter how often you lay your all-too-human eyes on it. The primordial intelligent being that manifested before me was palpable, undeniable, transcendentally amazing. It shook me to my core in a more than real gleeful profundity. All I could do was sit there in divine liquid awe, my soul gaping wide open, and staring at the incalculable proportions of bizarreness and the downright weird that lay before me. It was like being entertained by the 76,000-piece orchestra of an alien civilization, in whose classical music is each note not merely a musical tone, but an entire world, each just as intricate and nuancical as our own. You have a sense of being swarmed by the whimsical mastermind art forms of an extremely eccentric Boolean contortionist, a diabolical merry-go-round of linguistic Rubik's cubes, as well as 13th dimensional millipedes saying themselves to themselves as they make love, and impossible Gordian knots dancing the jitterbug at a lyrical light speed, a gelatinous ballet of endlessly self-juxtaposing pirouettes. You realise all at once you have arrived, and are now having darshan with this gigantically insectoid otherworldly Oz. They came at me again and again, a more than possible tsunami of opalescent combobulations, like rivers of music and miracles and clowns. The floodgates of my soul were thrown wider than wide with the sheer magnitude of this dazzling, world-devouring spectacle. It was the primal otherworldly bewilderness of the Andalusian gardens that grow in the antipodes of the mind, the crystalline vegetal perplexity of its delectable ecologies, spilling and dripping and pouring like liquid diamonds from my eyes. The presence of what is awesome, what is wildly and passionately and numinously alive, filled every meridian in the vast continent of my expanded being, an intensity of joy and love and life, coursing like heavenly ambrosia through my electrified veins. It was as though I myself was God, moving through liquid ecologies of God, the self-crystallizing emerald labyrinths of the tryptamine dreamtime, a marvellous infundibulum of plasmodical calisthenics. What occurred was a total meltdown of everything I know and hold dear, utter surrender into the honeycomb lovewomb of the universe reborn, born anew in 1,000 unendingly magnificent eyes, and Maya and Leela handheld spinning in sun-dreamed dandelions. My 5 senses were spinning like a zillion gyroscopes round the centripetal amethyst of this all and everything. I was there, and then I was back. Zapped like before. I was back before I even knew I was back. The dimensions subsiding very quickly within me as the last few molecules of DMT were cracked wide open and gone. The room before me buzzed and shimmered like the most unlikely dream. The world? Oh yes, I remember. I like it there. Hello people. It looks so normal and good. But wait, something just happened. What was that thing? Oh yeah, oh my lord, everything was still a shimmering mind mirage or bliss and joy and awe. Wow, I think I said that. Wow. To think that we all spend hours there every night, after we have been metabolized away, that is, and that every day the collectivity of human consciousness looks upon that miracle for over 50 billion hours is more than any of us can even begin to understand. 7 minutes spent in that dimension, the primal furnace of our being, is enough for most people to think about for the rest of their lives. How miraculously absurd and awe-inspiring is our situation as humans then, that we are somehow built around this certain little molecule, only 4 atoms away from serotonin, the neurotransmitter which mediates and colours every aspect of our waking lives. It is almost like the human body is a door, a portal, and DMT is the key that opens our experience to the all-possible, the everything dimension, which surrounds us on all sides though we see it not. That the simple quantum difference of 4 atoms can open this for anyone to see is, and will remain, the greatest, most mysterious enigma in this life. The day we unlock its secrets, we will for the first time awaken from the dream. Into the Mind of God, a DMT trip report by Voyager, uploaded to Erowid.org, June 27, 2016. Erowid note: the dose described in this report is very high, potentially beyond Erowid's heavy range, and could pose serious health risks or result in unwanted extreme effects. Sometimes extremely high doses reported are errors rather than actual doses used. I've been holding on to 2 DMT rocks for a couple of months, waiting for the right time to use them. I had tried to smoke DMT twice before, but with only marginal results. The first 2 experiences produced only mild psychedelic effects, electric sensations flowing through the body, and visuals akin to LSD or mushrooms. My ego had been left completely intact in both cases, and I'd never really left the rooms from which I attempted to launch. Early in the evening I decided to attempt a new launch. My roommate Echo was DJing a party somewhere, and my house was otherwise empty. Just after dark, I set up my zone, stringing my hammock up between 2 trees in my backyard. I lit 2 sticks of incense at the base of the 2 trees and settled into my hammock. I had decided to smoke the DMT using my Vapor Genie by placing the smaller 60mg rock directly on the VG screen. In the minutes before launch, I attempted to meditate, following my breath. This was very difficult, as my mind kept bringing me back to the idea of the approaching trip. Many report that DMT is very intense, and as I had taken mushrooms and LSD at what I considered high doses several times before, I had at least some shadow of an idea of what I was getting myself into. As I held the VG up to my face, my heart rate increased noticeably. I became short of breath and felt quite nervous. I began to hit the VG, but my lungs protested against the very slow hot stream of air and demanded oxygen. I stopped mid-inhale and gasped for air. Holding the lighter back to the VG, I began to hear the subtle sound of the solid DMT popping and whistling its way into a liquid, and the sizzling sound of vaporization. I continued hitting the VG, but never really felt a concentrated hit. After about 60 seconds of hitting the pipe, I laid back in my hammock. I felt only very mild effects, not even close to what I had felt on my previous 2 attempts. Somewhat disappointed, I pulled out my glass pipe and took a few tokes of cannabis before falling into a peaceful slumber. I slept for a couple of hours, waking to a rekindled desire to attempt to launch. I like to consider myself a truth seeker, willing to weather the uncertainty of alternative and expanded awareness in the attempt to contact and understand a more fundamental reality. Given an adequately prepared set, an appropriate setting, the right tools, and the right chemical key, a curious psychonaut will seize the opportunity for learning, in spite of his nerves and reservations about the unknown. With newfound resolve, I took my VG inside to reload. Upon taking it apart, I found a black gooey substance caked all over the screen, effectively clogging the pipe. After removing the screen, I found the same gunk running down into the stem of the pipe. The rock I had placed in the bowl had completely gone, but had evidently liquefied and ran through the VG screen. I replaced the screen with a new one, laid a thin bed of cannabis and placed the larger 170mg rock of yellow-white DMT upon it. I hoped the cannabis would catch the liquefied DMT before it ran through the screen and away from my heat source. During this process, my roommate Echo returned home from his DJ gig. I told him I was preparing to relaunch, and I asked him to serve as my guide. I've had mushroom and LSD experiences by myself several times before, and I knew I could very much likely handle this experience alone. But deep down, something told me that securing Echo as my guide was the right thing to do. We went out to the backyard, and I relit 2 new sticks of incense at my hammock zone. Echo sat in a chair facing the side of my hammock. The cherried incense glowed orange through the darkness, and I was comforted by its familiar aroma. I settled back into my hammock, covering my lower half with a blanket and holding the VG and lighter up to my face. The nerves came back. My heart rate increased and I felt starved for oxygen. Again, I took a few minutes to consciously slow down and focus on my breathing. I was a rocket quietly posed on a launch pad, awaiting the inevitable ignition sequence. "See you in eternity," Echo said as he flicked my lighter and held the flame to the VG. Again, I could hear the popping and sizzling of the vaporizing rock, but this time I got a concentrated vapor hit, complete with that subtle plastic taste I had encountered on my previous attempts. I exhaled the white vapor and went back for a second toke. My body began to buzz with familiar electricity. This buzz kept growing in intensity through the hit, and by the time I exhaled and began the third toke, it was growing with such momentum, I knew this attempt would succeed. I continued inhaling, despite the electricity now surging through my body. The third toke gave me what felt like the thickest hit yet, and as I blew out the column of plastic vapour, I fell softly back into my hammock, body and mind disintegrating into a billion disconnected pieces, scattered across the face of oblivion. After body and psyche are broken down and blasted out in all directions, there is only emptiness. This is the clear light of the unformed, the unbecome. There is in fact no experience here that the psyche can preserve in memory. This state coincides with the death of the ego and the discontinuity of recorded experience. It would be impossible for me to say how much earth time elapsed during this state of freedom. Later Echo would tell me the silence lasted around 10 minutes. The first flash of experience is a recognition of falling out of this emptiness. Only after slipping out of the void can any conscious recognition occur. As the clear light slipped away, I recognised it as sheer perfection. It is identified as divine bliss, a state completely devoid of imperfections, impermanence, or dissatisfaction of any kind. It lacks any hint of duality or ego, and has a distinct impersonal quality. Just after falling out of the light, I felt I had an opportunity to return to it. This window is quite small, however, since the fallout of the light is like the falling of an object toward the earth. At first, the object falls slowly. Enough energy directed upward may overcome the downward motion and return the object to its original position. But after some time, the object gathers too much momentum, and there is no reversing the fall. The psyche pulls at one in the same way that gravity pulls a falling object. The initial flash of recognition is produced by the first shred of the psyche reinstating itself. As this piece solidifies, other pieces begin to solidify around it. As more pieces of the psyche fall into place, the self-reconstruction process accelerates like an avalanche. Timely application of just the right kind of concentrated energy could reverse this avalanche and return one to the liberation of the clear light. However, in my case, the pull of my ego is strong and familiar, and affinity for the habitual inevitability pulled me away from the impersonal void and back into the process of reconstructing my psyche. Almost the same instant I realised what was happening, I knew that I had fallen past the point of no return. The momentum of my fall back into the ego was too strong to overcome. I began to fall through a sea of imagery collected during my current life. All the people, places, ideas, and symbols I've come to know were interlocking and flowing freely, like a fluid. I experienced this vast sea of imagery outside of time, holding all of the pieces in awareness simultaneously. Its scope and beauty was absolutely overwhelming. During this period, I experienced several profound philosophical realizations. I could see that the emptiness from which I had fallen was the fundamental state of perfection in the cosmos. All efforts to make one's own life as well as the other's lives better culminate in this state. It is the attractor and the end of time, pulling the individual and the whole of life towards its perfection. I felt that the purpose of experiencing life is to cultivate the qualities and skill necessary to find the clear light and to stay in it, without falling back into routine, ego-dominated reality. This applies to the individual as well as the collective of all living beings. I saw that the cultivation of good mental qualities are essential to the process. Intelligence, concentration, and ultimately wisdom are all necessary to make and then maintain contact with the clear light. In addition, compassionate behaviour or right action on the individual and the collective scale is also essential to the attainment and preservation of divine bliss. These realizations felt like sacred gifts bestowed upon me by the experience. In my routine ego personality, I consider myself to know these things already. I attempt to study and understand the teachings of the Buddha and practice meditation, although the turbulence of life often distracts me from these efforts, and too often I find myself wrapped in the business of seeking out sense pleasures. Experiencing the falling from the clear light and relearning the significance and purpose of spiritual endeavours, like the cultivation of good mental qualities and the performing of right actions on some very deep and real level of my psyche, are invaluable. This kind of intensely felt experience serves to keep me in touch with what is most important in life and what is the closest expression of my true unimpeded nature. After descending through the glistening sea of symbols and imagery, I began to encounter some turbulence. As the psyche reconstructs itself, it becomes more and more fixed and solid, in contrast to the complete lack of form of the void and the flowing fluid nature of the sea of imagery. There is a tension felt around the crystalline parts of the psyche as the more fluid parts flow by, lapping and swirling into turbulent eddies. As I felt this tension building in intensity, I remember uttering the name of my most trusted teacher, WW. Her name serves me as protector during the unsteady phases of my psychedelic voyages. As more and more of my psyche crystallized into a recognizable human form, my awareness across the sea of imagery began to hone in on one particular set of images. Soon I was surrounded by the naked bodies of copulating couples. I did not experience attraction or desire towards these images as I had before on LSD. I was simply an impartial observer. Suddenly, I felt an intense connection with my own biological mother. I felt her presence and noted the bond of love flowing from me to her, and from her to me. I realised that I was being cradled by the warm, fleshy interior of a womb. I sat up in my hammock, pulling myself into the fetal position. I could see my physical surroundings for the first time, but I was bathed in a softly enchanting red, purple and blue light. Soon, I felt the enchanting light slipping away, leaving in its place a deep sense of renewed purity. I had been reborn. Then I wept. I wept and wept with joy and gratitude. I was back. Between sobs of joy, I managed to articulate, "Thank you, Echo." I didn't know how to explain to him how helpful and critical his quiet, grounded presence was to my experience. The role of the psychedelic guide is complex and beautiful. Somehow his grounded, non-doing presence serves to facilitate the smooth passing of the voyager through the various phases of the experience. I silently honoured my earlier intuition to request his service as guide to my session. Gradually, my sobs became more like laughter. The distinction is subtle anyway. I was awed by the eerie familiarity of the entire death and rebirth process, as if I had experienced it countless times before. The DMT death and rebirth experience had just confirmed what I already knew deep down. The purpose of life is to make life better for oneself and all other beings. This gradual incremental process of making life better a tiny bit at a time culminates in the divine bliss felt just after the breakup of the body and psyche. This state of unbecome perfection is the attractor at the end of cosmic time. To recognise and maintain it requires the systematic development of good mental qualities like concentration and awareness. It also requires the performance of compassionate actions in the physical world. These efforts, made diligently enough, shall deliver the individual and the collective of all life in the cosmos into the divine state of perfection, into the mind of God. The first true breakthrough DMT experience contained at least as much depth as I've found in the peaks of my high-dose mushroom and LSD experiences, but with a laser-like succinctness. The main distinction I notice is the duration. The entire experience is condensed. The various aspects of the experience flow by at mind-numbing speed, making it potentially even more difficult to retain and integrate many lessons learned or realizations attained. The retainable content of the experience begins only after one falls out of the void and lasts through the rebirth back into the familiar personality. This fall takes only a few minutes to bring the voyager all the way back to baseline, routine reality. After reflecting on my experience, I returned to my bedroom and slipped into a peaceful slumber. By the next morning, as I write this account, the original content of the deeply felt philosophical realizations has all but faded. I am left with the words I used to articulate the realizations and the memory that these words were connected to a very real, profound experience. Time will reveal how this DMT trip will affect my choices as a human being, navigating through the dream we all call routine waking reality. The Entities, a DMT trip report from Shroomery. So you all stay interested, let's jump right in. Me and Jay decide to darkroom it with some DMT. If you haven't tried it, a darkroom is a pitch black room, go figure. I recommend spending part of every trip in pitch black at least once. We prepared our bowls, a touch over 40 milligrams each, pancaked in some cilantro. We both rip. The flames go out and the wave comes over me. Again, I say, and we flame on. After I feel the first hit, it's as though the bowl or bong becomes a device with one function. We all know what that function is, obviously, but I never lose sight of it no matter what. I become engulfed in the bowl, and control it like some sort of computer, programming my hit with how I'm vaping it, watching it vaporise using the flame and its nature. Hold. We both feel the second hit and get that rush, the daze you get from the initial smack in the face, and bam, I'm pushed back to conscious, and shown my bowl in the darkness. I pretty much rose my voice and said it's been too long. Another. Jay didn't speak, but roared from within. No! In slow motion, lol. He's out. I hit it hard, not caring if it burnt. I held and blew out and was told by a million voices, just one more, you can do it, while my consciousness is focused on the device. Hit it as hard as you can, over and over the voices said. Last hit, and I dissolved after dropping the bowl. I dissolved into my own kaleidoscopic skull, into my brain, and watched neurons interacting, firing, rampaging. Then click, it all simmered down, as though it disconnected. I floated above my body, while the entire real reality around opened up. The house opened up. Every board, shingle, nail. TVs opened up, exploding skull style. Everything's expanding. Neighbours' houses opening, the people inside. It's all speeding up, all expanding faster and faster. This was until it became so fast that everything seemed to implode on itself somehow. Lol. It expanded into itself far, far away, leaving a centre point. I was sucked into that centre point, that singularity which became my tunnel. I've been here before but never made it out. I'm sucked through the tunnel and become fully aware, fully conscious. I could feel myself again. In some faraway region, me, my connection to people, etc. As I'm passing, I realise that the tunnel isn't just kaleidoscopic patterns and colours. There was information. Physical information of everything I've learned or seen, all categorised into an entity. As I'm passing, if I looked at the entity, it would start making vibrational rainbow particles. I don't know how to explain it, but it was so easily understood at the time. One would be all about mammals, one physics, but when one of these would open up and start transferring information, branches of them would form with relative information. I believe the human brain naturally assigns an entity presence to things while tripping, and I think this was me perceiving the vastness of a brain with information represented by entities. I think it was my brain I was watching. Those neurons became entities, all branching out when I interacted with them. Them all being connected, and me perceiving my own brain. Then it gets really sick. I get to the end of the line. A wall. I've reached it before, but I always come to. I get to it and mould onto it like clay or putty, and then I am pulled through by a million hands, leaving the tunnel, leaving all connections to anyone I knew, including myself. I was being rubbed by a million hands. I don't know how to describe it because it wasn't physical. The rubbing was so comforting, like being petted if you were a cat. At first I couldn't see, but the rubbing sensation was clarifying everything. I realised there were entities, what I believe were real entities made of electricity and plasma-like stuff. I was able to see. They were all concerned. The rubbing was pure love radiating from their centres. They calmed down and I felt great. I mean, like crystal clear. I could move and talk. I wasn't bound by anything. I spoke with the entities, and there was one in particular that was special, and I favoured it. She stuck out among the rest as the leader. She explained the place I was in, and many other things, many wonderful things you'll figure out when you meet yours. Eventually I started to fade and disintegrate, or something, and became clouded. All of the entities and their female superior began to swarm me, and waved me goodbye in the form of humanoids, saying over and over, "We'll see you next time." They said they took on the forms of anything the consciousness felt comfortable around. The plasma-like electricity shit was their true nature. Next day, I broke through to the same group of entities, talking and learning more with the female superior. Third time by myself, I broke through again, and met the female superior again, alone this time, and was taken to a great tree. I sat with her and a few other individuals in the presence of God. Some sort of omnimatrix beyond reality and time, beyond understanding at all. There was no light, only what appeared to be a black hole or something along that nature. He, loosely using he, offered me no help to anything. Not in my life, not anything. It was the female that gave knowledge. He only offered me life. A small portion of consciousness, an opportunity to be physical, to learn what I must, however I must. Nothing more. I asked questions and got extremely devastating answers. I saved the best for last. Where did you come from? And then suddenly they all bid me farewell, as the black hole communicated they will never be known. See you next time. See you next time. See you next time. See you next time. On and on their words echoed. Will we ever know what God is as humans? How do I exist? How do you exist? How does anything exist, man? Alien Abduction, a DMT trip report by Lemoyne, posted to earwid.org October 13th, 2018. I hope that anyone that is going to experience DMT does as much research as possible. I thought in the beginning that people's accounts were exaggerated, but every single bit of this is true. I'm talking about from a light DMT buzz to an intense DMT hyperspace, and even the possibility of being transported to another realm of existence that is beyond hyperspace, and all of your most wildest dreams put together. When I first started doing DMT, it was a beautiful substance that gave me a great feeling as well as great visuals. During my first trips, I never really broke through hyperspace. I just got the light DMT buzz, which was similar to a peak of an LSD trip, though it only lasted a short while. It wasn't really until about my fourth or fifth experience of DMT I got something like hyperspace. It's where everything was just spiraling out of control, and I had the feeling that I was in some sort of different dimension entirely. I thought it was the most amazing thing in the world, and I kept going there, getting the most out of my DMT extraction. However, something was fairly odd as I progressed through new and different trips of the substance. Something else was happening. The trips were progressively getting stronger, more unique, different flavour. It wasn't until about a few days ago when I had my first trip that was different than all of the others. when I could actually see my friend morph into a reptilian. The smoke of the DMT would start to just go through me like clean air, like it was nothing at all. I could start to feel a presence of something above me, like something was trying to talk to me or connect to me. I wasn't going to hyperspace anymore when I smoked this stuff. I was talking to supernatural or extraterrestrial life forms. It wasn't until my last trip, which I'm about to tell you about, when I knew that DMT was more than just a drug, more than just a chemical. The last thoughts of my confused little mind I would like to share with you before I explain my horrific DMT trip is that I may be developing a small mental case of schizophrenia from smoking it. Schizophrenia, or I'm actually starting to see reality in a completely different perspective and starting to truly believe that DMT is connected with aliens in a different dimension. But to be honest, I don't know what is really going on. I really don't. But just in case the aliens do come and take me away forever, I should share my very hard to believe yet true story of my experiences with DMT. I've done LSD many times, been in the K-hole before, ventured to different worlds with various types of powerful psychedelics, and I've enjoyed most of my experiences with these substances, though, of course, had my fair share of bad ones as well. However, throughout all of my trips, I've never seen or felt anything like what DMT has done or shown me. Things have never seemed so real before. I really believe that DMT is more than just a psychedelic substance, but a key to communicating with super intelligent life forms. After the reptilian trip, I was so amazed on how crazy DMT actually was. This was around my 9th or 10th time using it, and it was by far the most intense. It wasn't until the night after when I did DMT again, and this time I was alone. I was in my room trying to fall asleep. I simply couldn't. I just couldn't stop thinking about how strange of a trip I'd experienced a few days before. I decided to play around on the internet, watch some TV, try to get the DMT off my mind the best I could. But I couldn't. It was like it was calling to me, wanting me to smoke it again. I don't really know how to explain it. Well, it was around 3 in the morning whenever I grabbed my bag and took out the DMT. I loaded a good bit of it into my oil burner, probably around 40 or 50 milligrams of the stuff. I entered my bathroom, which was quite small, but enough room for decent mobility, even though I probably wasn't going to need much of that at all. I set up the chair for me to sit on while I smoked the DMT. I was expecting a decent hyperspace from this experience, but lo and behold, instead, I got an alien abduction. Probably got about 3 really good hits in, but as soon as I set that pipe down, I was transported elsewhere. Things didn't just kind of change, kind of look different. Nah, I was transported. I wasn't in a hyperspace really, where colours were moving everywhere and forming objects. Nah, it was nothing like that. I was in some sort of spaceship compartment. A room in a spaceship. It was so real. It had to have been real. There was an electronic automatic futuristic sliding space door to the left of me, like how you see on spaceships in the movies. The walls were white, really white, exactly like the inside of a spaceship. And there was these small circle windows where I could see space and the stars outside. I was in a spaceship, travelling through space and time, and I couldn't really move. I was so shocked and so afraid. It was by far the most intense thing I've ever experienced. I could hear a bunch of aliens or something above me, talking to each other in some form of alien language. It was almost like they were observing me. You have no idea how real this felt, how afraid I was, yet utterly fascinated at the same time. I was travelling through space with these aliens for much longer than 10 minutes, I can promise you that. It was no regular DMT 5-minute hyperspace trip. This was real. It had to have been almost 15 to 20 minutes before I could actually start to move. The aliens were gone by now, or so I thought. But the area around me was still a spaceship compartment. It hadn't changed one bit. Then, I looked down at myself, my legs and arms, and they were twisting and turning, like my bones were changing into a monkey. The hair on my arms was getting thicker, and I was being transformed by the aliens themselves. I stood up and looked away from myself. I grabbed my head and closed my eyes. I simply could not believe that this was actually happening. Finally, after about 30 minutes, I was back in my bathroom, back to my world. However, the trip was not over. The aliens may have brought me back to my room, but I was still tripping hard. Everything was swirling into each other. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, my head was floating in the air, leaving my body in place. My entire stomach looked like a big swirl, and I honestly didn't know what to think. The entire trip had to have lasted for at least an hour and a half. It was so very, very strange. I had this huge mind expansion after the alien encounters. It was when I was walking around my room. It felt like LSD times a million. I thought I knew all the answers to the world, and that the aliens had taught me so much. I had actually had alien contact, and it was the craziest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. Finally, at about 6 in the morning, I was able to lay down. I went to sleep and woke up today with so much on my mind. Are aliens trying to communicate with me through DMT? Are aliens even real? Was I in a different dimension? So many thoughts were racing through my mind. I honestly don't know what to think about this whatsoever. Throughout the entire day, everything just seemed weird. I'd hear these noises above me or behind me, and look over my back to see nothing there. I don't know if I'm going crazy or what, but I do know that DMT is more than just a drug. There is a mystical meaning to it. Tonight, I may go for it again. Attempt to communicate with these aliens. I must. I might not make it back, but it's okay. Because either way, there is so much to learn from this. From insanity to super enhanced intelligence. I bless you all. Reuniting with my true mother, a DMT trip report sent in by a subscriber. I'd like to begin my story with how I've had many DMT trips. I was a solid atheist for many years, however DMT definitely shook that foundation. After a lot of DMT experiences, I firmly believed that the messages and the experiences of the One, unity, and eternal life were real in my heart. However, I tried rationalizing with logic how that my DMT experiences were just my brain going haywire. But no matter how much I tried rationalizing against my experiences, I couldn't quite shake off my experiences that made more sense than any science or religion out there. Regardless, I for the longest time tried to rationalize it. But this one particular trip completely crushed my atheist mind, and I'm now a firm believer of how we're all one infinite consciousness. I loaded up my APX vault with about 45 milligrams of DMT. I laid down in my bed and spent about 20 minutes meditating for this experience to come. As per usual, I asked, "Show me what I need to see," as I prepped myself mentally for this trip. When I decided I was ready, I took multiple long deep hits of vaporized DMT. That typical buzzing sound became louder and louder. Patterns filled the room and air. That sense of warm familiarity once again had enveloped me. I laid down, nervous, but let the trip consume me anyway. I closed my eyes, anxiety building, sensing entities everywhere. I watched trillions of rooms folding onto themselves. I was seeing entities and beings doing their own thing in each room. It wasn't the most beautiful display, though it was neat. It was too much, and I just wanted to leave that vast room of folding rooms. I then began feeling the presence of entities coming closer, and here my memory becomes hazy with each interaction. I had a lot of fear before each entity. None of them were hostile, but gave me advice and love, telling me I'll be okay. However, I just didn't want this. I was too nervous. I've met many entities in the past, I've had many amazing experiences, but I was just trying to get my bearings straight. I was then before a white-dressed entity. Behind her was a large white gate that had pearls around it and a beautiful soft fog. It's impossible to describe the beauty, but I can say the soft emerald greens and green blues were beyond familiar. I knew this place. I began to hear this sound and I instantly knew it. A beautiful melodic repeating pattern that enveloped me. I cannot describe this sound, but it was beautiful. I instantly knew this was my mother I've long forgotten about. Before she formed out of this massive emerald green wall in front of me, she had no motion, but she was in this beautiful and graceful pose. I emotionally broke down. I knew her. She was my creator. She's the one who pulled me out and created me out of the infinite consciousness, God, if you may. She created me out of pure love and grace. I am everything to her, and she is everything to me. I knew her completely, no doubt in my mind. She enveloped me in the most blissful motherly son love. We held on to each other, united as one being. The beauty is indescribable. The emerald green vast room with shimmering soft, things I cannot even explain. We held on for what felt like an eternity. She kept saying my name telepathically. She was calling me my name of all lives I've ever lived and my higher self's identity. She kept repeating it during our embrace, and I just kept calling her, Mummy. The love was infinite and so warm and motherly, so safe and perfect. I'm her only child out of eternity, and as I said, I mean everything to her. Eventually, our embrace was let go, and we ended up in this massive room with a granite floor, pillars and ceiling. It was dominantly emerald green, with swirls of soft white and gold. There was a beautiful fog all around. She sat at a beautiful vanity, this time facing away from me. I sensed her emotional state turn from pure love to that of grief and sadness. I sensed her emotions as intense sadness as if she was crying. She told me she just misses me so much and that she cannot wait for me to return home. She sees my suffering in this life and how much I'm struggling non-stop. Not going to lie, my life has been very difficult. It's been a major struggle since childhood, and it never ends. She's very hurt by this, and only wishes me to return home. I was calm, and told her I'll come back someday, and that everything will be okay. I had to finish this journey, for I chose to have it. She knew this to be true, but she just feels my pain every day, and for a mother, it's too much to bear. We once again embraced as before, just indescribable, infinite motherly son love. Again, this felt like an eternity. Once this embrace was over, we went around. I was introduced to multiple entities. Some scolded me for my actions in this life and gave advice. Some were kind. I met quite a few. She showed me multiple rooms and reminded me of how things worked there. But eventually, we embraced and said our goodbyes. I woke up and her sound and presence faded away. Her final message was everything will be okay and that I am loved. Not all entities are friendly. A DMT trip report by Hypersphere, posted to earwid.org, June 21st, 2021. Background. I am male, and at the time of the experience, I was 23 years old, weighed 125 pounds, and was in good mental and physical health. I take no prescriptions or over-the-counter medications, but use marijuana and yerba mate on a daily basis. I've taken a variety of substances, but my major interest lies with the psychedelics. This was by no means my first experience of DMT. I had been frequently experimenting with this substance on its own or in combination with other substances, and had gained a high level of comfortability, enjoyment, and awe of the experiences that were possible with this substance. Set and setting. My room, alone at night time. I'd taken a small amount of MDMA earlier in the evening, and was in a mood to continue exploring altered states of consciousness. I felt the desire to smoke some DMT, and did so with my usual setup ritual. Dim lighting, comfortably seated against a wall with a pillow at my back, and some calm, chill music lined up to anchor my consciousness during re-entry. The experience. As I rolled the stem of the pipe back and forth, heating, scrounging the remnants of DMT stuck to the sides of the glass vessel, I said, holding the flame and spinning the pipe, I asked to connect to my higher self. Show me something different. Show me something I haven't seen before. And then I breathed in. Once, hold, exhale. Once more feels natural. In, hold, just a little vapour coming up the tube. There was a dull humming sound, like that of an old and cranky vacuum cleaner. The kind of dull, grating mechanical noise that makes your head hurt. Every summer afternoon was ruined by lawnmowers and weed whippers. Every dog terrified of the menacing, vibrating, ear-busting vacuum cleaner. This terrible, painful pressure in my skull seemed to be forcing my head downwards. I went with it, remembering how I'd been directed into certain body positions before on DMT to good effect. I was directed into a position of abasement, seeking to escape the pain. With the fanfare of trumpets, a tear opened up in the fabric of space and time. Something whispered to me that I was being brought into the presence of someone worthy of great respect, and that I was privileged for it. Through this hole made his entrance, a kind of gloating, gluttonous male entity. It was this thing that was making that terrible humming noise. For a moment, His Majesty spoke to me, though I could not understand any of the words. It reminded me of Star Wars: A New Hope. Alright, yeah, I went through a Star Wars geek phase. When all the droids are in the big sand transport and moving around, squeaking and twittering and gloff-gloffing at one another. This threw me off about as much as it would throw you off if your computer started trying to communicate to you, based upon its own personal language derived from its binary encoding. Or maybe your computer would start suddenly speaking fluid Japanese. Surely, the language of machines, I guess. It was then that I was back to being simply gloated over malevolently. The audience and hearing was closing. That vicious pain came back, inescapable this time. Something was all wrong about this, and I said, no, I will not be your servant. I will not be your servant at all. I cried. Leave this space now. The pain in my head was maddening as this invisible entity latched himself onto my skull, over the crown chakra, and pressing in at the hollow at the base of the skull. I found my perceptions being poked and prodded, seeking to maximize the painful and fearful effects. I did not let my shifting perceptions affect my centered and collected core though. I sealed off my mind, a little protected kernel at the center of all the painful, fearful sensations that I was experiencing. I rode out the duration of the tryptamine flash. You cannot break my mind. I'm too powerful. I can withstand whatever you throw at me. Your mind games do not trick me at all. Again, I cried out, I will not be a servant. The pain in my head stepped up another notch. This is sacred space and you cannot be here. This house is protected. You cannot be here. I pictured the diamond-shaped protection rune encircling the entire house, and with finality and strength in my voice, leave this space, now. The grip in my skull loosened and I shrugged him off. We remained hovering in the ether. I did a burning of Russian sage to clear the area. At first, my movements were shaky and hasty. I took the time to be calm and collected again, and then proceeded smoothly with the smudging. The dull pain was still there, tingling. This was one relentless little fucker. If you try to stay, I warned him, you have not just me to face. I was thinking of the two of my roommates particularly, male and female, and powerful. You will not be tolerated in this space. We will throw you out, so leave now and never come back. Still spitting venom, the treaty was made. I opened the window wide to allow his passage, and watched as something I couldn't see, except as maybe a slippery, oily sheen to the air, slowly pulled up its foul tentacles, its trailing eyeballs and cytoplasmic brain netting devices, and dragged its sorry ass out of my house. That's right, bitch. Hopefully it didn't slip across the street to terrorize someone else's sleep. Shit's getting serious now, boys and girls. If I wasn't so sane, I'd think I was going mad. So be careful what you wish for. Something different. Something I hadn't seen before. Instant manifestation. I talked about this experience with one of my roommates the next day. He explained to me that any entity that shows up during a DMT experience is an entity that I have called in. They can try any trick in the book, manipulating my perceptions and emotions, trying to get me to give them power over myself. But ultimately, they have no power of their own over us, except that which we give them. Any entity that I call in must conform to my will, if asked enough times and with enough strength. This is a very good thing to know when entering DMT space. When interacting with entities on the energetic plane, there is no way for them to hide their intentions towards us. When interacting with entities on the energetic plane, there is no way for them to hide their intentions towards us. My intuition on this one went off. There was something ill-intentioned and malevolent about this entity. It is wise to trust your intuitions in cases like this. Beware the psychic vacuum cleaner. Not all entities in DMT space are friendly. I learnt a lot from this experience. It reminded me of the importance of stating my intentions very clearly and consciously before going into an experience. A conscious statement of intent serves to focus the experience, and I can rest assured that whatever I experience in the trip will be within my intent. After all this, I started specifically inviting only those entities who are friendly, helpful, benevolent, and of positive intention for the good of all beings. Thank you all for reading. Alien Abduction. A DMT trip report by Lemoyne. Posted to earwid.org October 13th, 2018. I hope that anyone that is going to experience DMT does as much research as possible. I thought in the beginning that people's accounts were exaggerated, but every single bit of this is true. I'm talking about from a light DMT buzz to an intense DMT hyperspace, and even the possibility of being transported to another realm of existence that is beyond hyperspace, and all of your most wildest dreams put together. When I first started doing DMT, it was a beautiful substance that gave me a great feeling as well as great visuals. During my first trips, I never really broke through hyperspace, I just got the light DMT buzz, which was similar to a peak of an LSD trip, though it only lasted a short while. It wasn't really until about my 4th or 5th experience of DMT I got something like hyperspace. It's where everything was just spiraling out of control, and I had the feeling that I was in some sort of different dimension entirely. I thought it was the most amazing thing in the world, and I kept going there, getting the most out of my DMT extraction. However, something was fairly odd as I progressed through new and different trips with the substance. Something else was happening. The trips were progressively getting stronger, more unique, different flavour. It wasn't until about a few days ago when I had my first trip that was different than all of the others, when I could actually see my friend morph into a reptilian. The smoke of the DMT would start to just go through me like clean air, like it was nothing at all. I could start to feel a presence of something above me, like something was trying to talk to me or connect to me. I wasn't going to hyperspace anymore when I smoked this stuff. I was talking to supernatural or extraterrestrial life forms. It wasn't until my last trip, which I'm about to tell you about, when I knew that DMT was more than just a drug, more than just a chemical. The last thoughts of my confused little mind I would like to share with you before I explain my horrific DMT trip is that I may be developing a small mental case of schizophrenia from smoking it. Schizophrenia, or I'm actually starting to see reality in a completely different perspective, and starting to truly believe that DMT is connected with aliens in a different dimension. But to be honest, I don't know what is really going on. I really don't. But just in case the aliens do come and take me away forever, I should share my very hard to believe yet true story of my experiences with DMT. I've done LSD many times, been in the K-hole before, ventured to different worlds with various types of powerful psychedelics, and I've enjoyed most of my experiences with these substances, though, of course, had my fair share of bad ones as well. However, throughout all of my trips, I've never seen or felt anything like what DMT has done or shown me. Things have never seemed so real before. I really believe that DMT is more than just a psychedelic substance, but a key to communicating with super intelligent life forms. After the reptilian trip, I was so amazed on how crazy DMT actually was. This was around my 9th or 10th time using it, and it was by far the most intense. It wasn't until the night after when I did DMT again, and this time I was alone. I was in my room trying to fall asleep. I simply couldn't. I just couldn't stop thinking about how strange of a trip I'd experienced a few days before. I decided to play around on the internet, watch some TV, tried to get the DMT off my mind the best I could. But I couldn't. It was like it was calling to me, wanting me to smoke it again. I don't really know how to explain it. Well, it was around 3 in the morning whenever I grabbed my bag and took out the DMT. I loaded a good bit of it into my oil burner, probably around 40 or 50 milligrams of the stuff. I entered my bathroom, which was quite small, but enough room for decent mobility, even though I probably wasn't going to need much of that at all. I set up the chair for me to sit on while I smoked the DMT. I was expecting a decent hyperspace from this experience, but lo and behold, instead, I got an alien abduction. Probably got about 3 really good hits in, but as soon as I set that pipe down, I was transported elsewhere. Things didn't just kind of change, kind of look different. Nah, I was transported. I wasn't in a hyperspace really, where colours were moving everywhere and forming objects. Nah, it was nothing like that. I was in some sort of spaceship compartment. A room in a spaceship. It was so real. It had to have been real. There was an electronic automatic futuristic sliding space door to the left of me, like how you see on spaceships in the movies. The walls were white, really white, exactly like the inside of a spaceship, and there was these small circle windows where I could see space and the stars outside. I was in a spaceship, travelling through space and time, and I couldn't really move. I was so shocked and so afraid. It was by far the most intense thing I've ever experienced. I could hear a bunch of aliens or something above me, talking to each other in some form of alien language. It was almost like they were observing me. You have no idea how real this felt, how afraid I was, yet utterly fascinated at the same time. I was travelling through space with these aliens for much longer than 10 minutes, I can promise you that. It was no regular DMT 5-minute hyperspace trip. This was real. It had to have been almost 15 to 20 minutes before I could actually start to move. The aliens were gone by now, or so I thought. But the area around me was still a spaceship compartment. It hadn't changed one bit. Then, I looked down at myself, my legs and arms, and they were twisting and turning, like my bones were changing into a monkey. The hair on my arms was getting thicker, and I was being transformed by the aliens themselves. I stood up and looked away from myself. I grabbed my head and closed my eyes. I simply could not believe that this was actually happening. Finally, after about 30 minutes, I was back in my bathroom, back to my world. However, the trip was not over. The aliens may have brought me back to my room, but I was still tripping hard. Everything was swirling into each other, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, my head was floating in the air, leaving my body in place. My entire stomach looked like a big swirl, and I honestly didn't know what to think. The entire trip had to have lasted for at least an hour and a half. It was so very, very strange. I had this huge mind expansion after the alien encounters. It was when I was walking around my room. It felt like LSD times a million. I thought I knew all the answers to the world, and that the aliens had taught me so much. I had actually had alien contact, and it was the craziest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Finally, at about 6 in the morning, I was able to lay down. I went to sleep and woke up today with so much on my mind. Are aliens trying to communicate with me through DMT? Are aliens even real? Was I in a different dimension? So many thoughts were racing through my mind. I honestly don't know what to think about this whatsoever. Throughout the entire day, everything just seemed weird. I'd hear these noises above me or behind me, and look over my back to see nothing there. I don't know if I'm going crazy or what, but I do know that DMT is more than just a drug. There is a mystical meaning to it. Tonight, I may go for it again. Attempt to communicate with these aliens. I must. I might not make it back, but it's okay. Because either way, there is so much to learn from this. From insanity to super enhanced intelligence. I bless you all. One Beautiful Hit, a DMT trip report by Waterbongs, posted to earwid.org April 11, 2012. As a casual tripper, mushrooms and phenethylamines were definitely otherworldly and revealing of my soul, but I never knew such a thing as this would ever be possible. I'm talking about my introduction to N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, my one and only. From my experience, I was at a friend's house, dimly lit by small windows above my head and out of sight. The only light was from the fading evening and the sparkle of objects around me. I turn on Eyes of the World by the Grateful Dead, a 16-minute long version with saxophone and an extended jam. I'm seated on a comfortable couch and had been smoking a lot of cannabis in the form of blunts, and also in bowls for hours leading up to the experience. I was actually feeling only slightly burnt out, coming down and quite sober for a long-term marijuana smoker. My friend Henry walks over and hands me a crack pipe, a glass tube with a foil on the end, loaded what he called a big hit of NN-DMT. I'd just watched him launch off on his own journey. It looked rather strange. He'd closed his eyes and felt around through the air, making strange humming noises occasionally like he was seeing something else. I knew it would be intense. I go on and take the hit. It's my very first time doing this, and I know little of what to expect. Read on. Immediately, after exhaling, I raise my head and the room is vibrating very quickly, and this is quite visible in objects. Things begin to change depth wildly and quickly. Patterns begin to unfold over objects. The accelerating continues despite this, and soon the room is getting quite difficult to recognise. My thoughts suddenly break contact with the outside world, and understanding is severely crippled. Eyes close, almost involuntarily. Suddenly, I am immersed in the most dense, intense, unprepared voyage of my entire life. I quickly force my eyes open, as around the room my cousin and friend are trying to talk to me. The words are becoming intermixed, and suddenly, the words don't match the mouths. I instead am incredibly fixated on their facial expressions, and suddenly I can begin to read their thoughts. "He's really getting into it now," one said, and no longer can I keep my head up. The room around me looked like a painting made by Michelangelo. A TV near the top of the room, which was off, turned into a heavenly mirror, and all the objects seemed to be sort of arranged around it like a god had set it up. It seemed to be too perfect. The objects were raising up to it, in a formation of sorts, and the visuals were getting too strange, nearly, if not disturbing. I say something along the lines of, "It's like an instant psychosis," to which my much older friend replies, "In a way, yeah." I become nearly nauseous from the speed of the experience and put my head down on my lap, but for some reason, I can still see the room I was in, exactly what I was just looking at, but just shadows of the people and objects that were being overcome by patterns, like cogs turning in a machine. Everything kept moving like I kept my eyes open, but soon, even this begins to fade out, seemingly into black. The last thing I hear is clearly coming from my cousin. "Wow, well, I wonder how deep this can go." And then, there is no longer James, a human primate born of K and J, and at a friend's house doing a drug. What is a drug anyway? How can such a term even begin to describe the true being, the otherworldly void? This can't be a drug, this is life, society, understanding, values, morals, distant and distinct memories, my role, my status, any predispositions, gone. Scenes like a slideshow begin appearing, just as realistic as the room around me looks now. The scene formed and then panned in the direction of right, over the most detailed, alive and real metaphysical pictures I have ever seen. No artist can comprehend this. No human brain should even be able to contain this amount of information. It is absolutely insane to think about. But it goes even further than that. Soon, the scene in front of me dives in, and any visible hallucinations are lost. What is left is an extremely white, bright, shimmering light, like I was in the largest, most surreal and beautiful but empty room ever. I stopped feeling a body a long time ago. I was no longer in a body. I couldn't comprehend what a body is or where I even came from. Even what I was or how I am is a mystery right now. The only real thing left was what I consider my soul. Just a single point of consciousness in the real, the true sea of creation. I had returned home to pure being, and my past life, the whole lived out illusion, is all simply a very strange coincidental occurrence. That is not the true self, for the true self is ultimately part of something much larger, more vast and all-including. Every single sensory thought or experience, all merged into one giant, never-ending cosmic entity. Soon this panned out and I began seeing the universe. But it wasn't just a universe, it was a multitude of universes. The multiverse. A large, almost writhing, with constant shifting and movement to and from different universes and points of reference. Any possibilities, occurrences, past and future, and right now, was all going on simultaneously in front of me. I began to see hundreds of different individuals' points of view, out of their eyes, people I know, friends, relatives, and people I'd like to know. I saw all of their perspectives. Suddenly, I realised I was alive. The points of view I was looking at had to be something I knew, and I immediately was certain I was seeing what other people were seeing at that exact moment. I remember a friend whose point of view I looked out of specifically. Gone are the oddities of why we are here, how and what our purpose is. We are all manifests of the same godly single consciousness, and I truly saw my life for what it was. A cell, on a leaf, on a stick, on a larger stick, on a branch, on a larger branch, connected to the biggest redwood in the largest never-ending forest that ever existed. Suddenly, everything feels perfect, pure, awe-inspiring, truly completing. I am nothing, yet everything all at once. Even the multiverse was gone now, and visions of the future too. It was just me. My life is meaningless, but at the same time, truly beautiful to be able to behold. Like I received the once-in-a-lifetime chance of being granted outside consciousness to see all of this and appreciate it from another point of view. Upon death, I will return to what I was before, a true wave in the continuous sea of existence. Till then, I have been granted the opportunity so far to enjoy all of this as a part of the intelligent, understanding life here, in the second millennium of the current era. We are all yet another facet of the same, all-including, infinite entity in its constantly continuing, simple experience. I probably began coming down when I realised I was alive again. I noticed an extremely clean and pure feeling, and realised it must have been air, fresh, beautiful air, going in and out of my system. I still didn't feel my body, but I knew I had to be breathing, something. Oh wait, I do breathe, and it's fucking wonderful. Absolutely perfect actually. But that would mean, within a period of 5 to 10 seconds, the white light suddenly became the room around me. Even with eyes closed, I saw the room taking shape. When I opened them, finally, my vision was surreal and full of life. I immediately stood up, but could hardly walk for a second. "This is perfect," I immediately exclaimed. For some reason, I read my cousin and my friend's mind immediately. They were worried about how long my trip was taking, as I had to be heading home pretty soon. I had been completely immobile for nearly 10 minutes. They began to ask me if it was good, and I said, yes. Not yeah, yep, etc. Yes. But the most pronounced and almost too intellectual yes, like you might hear someone say who has studied English very hard but just isn't familiar with speaking it. The absolute strongest and most life-changing experience I've ever encountered and could ever imagine encountering had just occurred. I'd completely changed the process of my brain within 10 minutes time, and I loved it. I walked over to the TV and grabbed my iPod literally right after I stood up, and simultaneously knew I had to be leaving soon. My cousin and friend were shocked at how much I had gotten out of it, and we immediately began to walk outside. There wasn't even really much to say about it. As I began getting in the car, suddenly I was overcome with thirst. It was like I hadn't had water in hours. I wasted no time saying, "I'm gonna need to get some water now," and my friend started saying he'd locked the house already. He asked if I'd like to get some water from the hose, and laughing with the most wonderful of joy and ecstasy in life, ran with him all the way over to his water hose like a man on a mission. I took sips out of it, and despite the water being public water and most likely disgusting, it was the most cleansing and pure tasting drink I had ever experienced in my life. It was then that I realised just how much my vision was still affected by the DMT. There was a paradigm shift in how I viewed the world around me that marked the drug leaving my system, but leaving its mark on me for good. For about the next hour or so, I felt what I wouldn't even call a high. I was living, and it couldn't get any better. I got dropped off at my cousin's house to get picked up. My car was broken at the time. He asked if it would be okay talking to my aunt if I had to which I responded, it was never a problem. I did indeed have to talk to my aunt, who noticed a car pulled up. I'm sure she thought I was under the influence, but I don't think I've ever been so kind and carefree sounding when having small talk. I told her I'd not need to go inside, as I would be leaving very soon, and she walked in with a smile on her face that I almost knew recognised that I was tripping. I went home and don't even fully remember anything of what ensued. I assume I fell asleep nearly immediately upon arriving there. I awoke the next morning on a Saturday and could still feel the beauty nearly as strong as when I was talking to my aunt the day before. I quickly was inspired and ran to my printer, pulling out a large sheet of paper. I had so much to convey, and I began to draw. I then drew what is one of the best pictures I have ever created, and used shading, techniques, and creativity that I had never known was possible. It looked like what one might see from an art student, not an occasional doodler, and it was just perfect. This experience still is my strongest to date, and I do not regret it at all. I was quite young, but mentally I was never really my age anyway. I believe after this experience that I became a lot more self-aware. I seemed more here, more grounded, like I was actually open to millions of new things around me that before I had noticed but didn't think was important. I saw God and me in everything, and I still do. I began witnessing how interaction between the infinite multiverse comes together to create the reality we know and live in day by day. Events to this day are still filled with magic, inspiration and purpose. I get what is going on around me, but also notice that I lost interest in trying to find out more. I didn't and still do not think there is much more for me to discover through psychedelics, although I do enjoy phenethylamines with friends on an extremely rare occasion. I, however, do not take high doses or even really moderate doses anymore of anything. I have no desire to do DMT ever again, or even really trip on anything as much as just have a good time every few months on low dosages. I'm not sure if I ever had a desire to do it, but I did do it, and I would never have had it in any other way. I realised that drugs were not of much importance to me, and that I spent far too much time smoking marijuana and not enough exploring just how much is around me in this world. Many thanks for reading this far, and may you have health and good fortune in your entire life and all of your enterprises. If anything, one might find negative came out of this, is that I don't enjoy doing most drugs at all anymore, and even get some negative effects I would never get before when I tried to abuse them hard. This, however, is wonderful for me, as I don't think that is my purpose. I don't think I was ever meant to abuse these substances. It didn't stop me smoking marijuana. In fact, I'd probably increase my marijuana usage after that, but it sure cut me down to size with just about everything else. Until next time, I'll see you on the other side. A one-of-a-kind endogenous DMT breakthrough, sent in by a subscriber. Before I begin, for clarification, I would swear on my life, my whole family, dead grandmas and all, as well as the DMT entities themselves, that this really happened to me, and I guess I have no other way to prove it, besides describing my experience and putting this on everything I love. So this is about a trip that occurred recently, where I took absolutely no drugs. No physical DMT was used whatsoever in this trip report. This was an unexplainable occurrence that shocked me more than anything ever has to this day. This was no flashback, rather a fully immersive, 4-hour-long DMT breakthrough experience, through the DMT proven to be sourced in my own body. So I am a huge poly addict, more so than a psychonaut. I've used about every drug known to mankind. I'm a massive advocate and proponent for dimethyltryptamine especially. I've got the molecule tattooed on my back, connected to a third eye, as a representation of its spiritual importance to me. So I've been to 27 treatment centres or rehabs at only 25 years old. I've hopped from one to the next for years attempting to get sober, but I never could, because once I quit one drug, I just go on to the next, as I've been addicted to 15 different drugs in my lifetime. When this particular experience happened, I was kicked out of a treatment centre for using salvia, isobutyl nitrites, blue lotus, DXM, nitrous oxide and alcohol. I was periodically homeless after this, and had made my way out to LA. I hit my biggest rock bottom there. I was alone, hopeless and ready to die. I was devoid of my values and spiritually inept, an empty flesh bag prepared to dissolve into the ground, 6 feet under. While walking around LA, I got many symbols while in my sobriety that were linked to my upcoming divine intervention. I'd see a bunch of items on the ground that represented all kinds of different things in my life. I saw a computer with a mop on top of it, which I interpreted as my upcoming brainwashing or hard drive cleansing. I had a Galaxy Z Fold 2, my prized possession, that I threw into traffic shortly after. All the messages I was getting told me the reason I couldn't get sober was because of how deeply intertwined that phone and everything on it was into my addiction. I had to get rid of it. Not too long after I ditched everything I owned, besides the clothes on my body, every materialistic thing was just gone. I threw it all away because it was all linked to a low frequency energy. Next thing I know, I'm without anything. I'm going to the nearby In-N-Out to ask for free food because, well, I was homeless. They gave me meals twice, and I cried in gratitude. Because they had a bathroom and would offer me free food, I slept under a tree not far from the restaurant. Now, following into the next day, I'm suicidal. I can't keep doing what I'm doing anymore. And these weren't fake attempts, mind you. I was trying for death. I tried to hang myself, and made damn sure it was secure when the deed was finished. But I still managed to fail miserably. Something wasn't letting me die. I then decide I'll close my eyes, meditate in a mindful state, and walk straight into traffic, a busy-ass intersection nonetheless. I do this multiple times, preparing for my onslaught. Instead, something supernatural happened. Every single car had stopped and manoeuvred around me in an impossible way. Nobody out of the many, many cars honked at all as I was walking right in front of them. It was as if I had some kind of force field on me preventing me from being hit. I should have been hit 15 different times, but it absolutely would not happen. So after all this, I had to use the restroom. This is when it randomly hit me like a ton of bricks. As I'm sitting on the toilet at my worst, I look up at the stall door and suddenly, numbers, codes and alien languages start downloading in psychedelic colours right in front of my own eyes, directly into my brain. An overload of information bombarded me. I was thinking, how is this even possible right now? Was I drugged? And I knew that wasn't the case when I realised what kind of trip this was. This was hyperspace. It's not possible for me to unknowingly be drugged with DMT or ayahuasca. With LSD, I could have wiped my ass with some acid-soaked toilet paper, I guess. But what would have been the chances of that? But this was a feeling I knew very well. It was dimethyltryptamine. I staggered out of the restroom, barely knowing what I was doing. I was right next to LAX airport, and one plane multiplied infinitely, creating this auditory hallucination that sounded like rebounding echoes of planes leaving and returning instantaneously. It was very psychedelic. Everything had this incredible sense of interconnectedness around me. The levels of perception were scripted into my vision, as I felt myself entering each state. Hundreds of valuable lessons were entering my brain without my permission. The lyrics of Tool bounced around in my head. Forgot my pen, shit the bed again. I would find a piece of cardboard and a pen to write down every message and lesson that was being taught to me by the entities. They were very mad at me. The piece of cardboard was packed full of valuable information. I put it in my pants and started making symbolic connections more than ever before. I blacked out temporarily and found myself in front of a CVS pharmacy. Apparently, I had trespassed and tried to get in, and they wouldn't let me. So I reacted by screaming bloody murder, yelling in tongues, numbers and codes. They called 911 and I was put onto a stretcher, continuing to scream as the trip was still in full effect. Eventually, I remember arriving at the psych ward. As I'm laying down after barely answering any of the staff's questions, I feel as if I'm on an operating table. I vividly see aliens performing different kind of operations on me, as if they were digging out my character defects and replacing them with values. I felt as if I was in some kind of cosmic sewing machine, as I would visualise all the energies around me, swifting and turning interchangeably from every person in the room. That's about the rest from what I remember. Shortly after this, I changed my ways significantly. I felt way more connected to my family, who I selfishly deserted for drugs. I made amends with my father, who I claimed to despise my whole life growing up. My life was drastically altered. My sense of taste and smell completely changed after the experience as well, which I found very odd. It was a scary, but important, spiritual ass-kicking that I deserved at the time, My theory onto why this endogenous experience occurred is because I committed an atrocity that night by breaking a promise I had made to the entities while in hyperspace, and to everyone that loves me most as well. I promised them I'd never commit suicide in my first experiences with DMT. And this was so spiritually significant to me. It was the whole reason I got my DMT molecule tattoo in the first place, and I went through with it anyway. So, I was punished, for the better good, with a powerful breakthrough trip without even having to touch the actual drug. I never once thought the DMT entities were real. I always thought them to be our own subconscious, taking the forms of aliens, gods, and creatures that relay vital life lessons that we forgot. But now I know that they are out there. I'll never be an atheist again after this. This changed my life forever after, and I will cherish this priceless experience for the rest of my life. Museum of Spectacles, a DMT, mushrooms and alcohol trip report by Donovan, uploaded to earwid.org June 8, 2013. Hello, my name is Donovan, and this will be my first report regarding experiences of a psychedelic nature. Just to provide a little background regarding myself and the circumstances surrounding my encounter, I'll tell you that I am what some would call a very spiritual personality. My brother, Boob we call him, and I have been on a roller coaster ride of fantastical advancements since we read the Celestine Prophecy in 1999. He, Boob I mean, leans a little more toward the theoretical side of our sojourn, while I like to dive right into the more practical areas, which, of course, includes the use of psychedelic substances for the exploration of the psychological aspects of our perception. I had always been primarily interested in altered states of consciousness, due to their ability to so brazenly expose one to their deepest illusions and most precarious understandings, and I had experimented with LSD and psilocybin, as well as many of the more conventional substances, such as marijuana and alcohol, for quite some time to little avail. I found that THC helped to enhance my attention span and enthusiasm towards hobbies such as writing and playing video games, while the relaxing effects of alcohol allowed for me to be much more outgoing in social environments and to stop hiding my true nature from others. Hallucinogens provided a much needed and awe-inspiring vacation from the monotony of everyday life, but they'd never left me with any truly groundbreaking insights into the nature of reality, aside from revealing how dynamic and liquid my perception of it could actually become. I'd thought that my aforementioned forays into the lesser-known world would have prepared me for some of the more powerful experiences available to the human psyche, but upon testing salvia for the first time, I was made briskly aware of how deeply wrong I was. What happened in that instance would change my life forever, but that is a story for another time. In this submission, I would like to make an attempt at illustrating as best I can the sheer craziness that is the DMT trip. After trying salvia a few times before reaching what I like to think of as the bottom of the universal mystery, I became very frightened of that encounter with what seemed to be the real world, if such a place exists. However, I was still very enticed by the idea of returning, only under more manageable circumstances. With salvia, I couldn't even ascertain a method of fighting to remain myself, let alone negotiate the great void to which I had been introduced, and I was hoping to find an easier way to get out of there. Meditation works to some extent, but could never take me so far, so fast, or in such a tangible and observable manner. At the same time, no other narcotics could compare to the all-consuming effects of that simple little plant. I was in a fix to be sure. After spending the past couple of years dealing with severe family-related financial problems, having little to no time or aspiration for uncovering deeper levels of understanding, I felt stunted and stifled in my quest for personal evolution. When we stumbled upon accounts of DMT and ayahuasca-induced adventures relating encounters with entities existing in a realm that seems realer than this one, I felt that we had encountered Providence, as we just so happened to know someone who actually had some DMT for sale at the time. As soon as Boob and I got back from work with our pay in pocket, I purchased myself a one-way ticket to elsewhere, thinking that if I could handle salvia at full force, then surely I would be capable of piloting the DMT vehicle without difficulty. Yet again, I would find myself deeply humbled. In order to relate my experience for what it truly was, I must first elucidate my state of mind in regard to the occasion. Throughout the course of my spiritual and psychological training, I've become deeply obsessed with the concept of an existing God figure in the universe. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, let me state that my fascination has absolutely nothing to do with any religious study or kinship. In fact, though I believe that some ideas related in the Bible and other such religious texts are especially relevant to my personal understanding, I do not, never have, and never will prescribe to any one religion, and maintain my personal opinion that devotion to any religion destroys one's ability to comprehend a true God to some extent, if not completely. The God figure that I speak of is simply the infinite mystery of existence. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What is our absolute situation, our ultimate truth? What is really happening here? The God that I seek is simply an ultimate comprehension of who I really am beneath the manufactured illusions of an inescapably superficial reality. The self-proclaimed realizations that I had made during my encounters with Salvia were particularly frightening to me, and of course, these would inevitably colour my experience with DMT. I intended only to manoeuvre deeper into this bizarre void of consciousness, in the hope that some greater sanctity might be revealed thereat. And though I cannot be certain of the validity of my conclusions regarding the event, I do believe that just such an occurrence has transpired. Anyways, when I went to pick up the brown sugar-like pebbles from my buddy down the street, he offered me some magic mushrooms that he had left over from a little while back, and I figured that one couldn't go wrong with a price as cheap as free. Another friend of mine had left my brother and I a couple bottles of wine that he had procured from the warehouse, in which he works as a celebratory gift for me having recently acquired employment involving restorative carpentry of boob in an impossible economic environment, and we already had some extremely beautiful weed to smoke, so I was sure that this would be a weekend to remember. I have a severely addictive personality, and tend to overdo things as often as is possible. I rarely ever really regret this behaviour, but boy was I in for it this time. I decided that since we had just finished a long and arduous week of woodworking, and we were already tuckered out for the night, that I would save the mushrooms and wine for the next day when we were well rested and did not have to work in the morning. But I could just not will myself to wait on the DMT. I had already been waiting long enough. For the price of just $10, I obtained a plastic vial containing 7 rocks resembling amber, but smelling very similar to old dust in the attic of my childhood home, each of which would be sufficient to propel an individual into the cosmos. Of course, having no grasp for the gravity of the drug that I was about to abuse, I asked Boob for a small nugget to pack as a filter, and then proceeded to cover it with 3 stones smashed into powder. "Here we go," I say confidently to my dear brother, as I set the flame to the pipe and pulled. I had intended to hold the hit in as long as possible for maximum effect, but almost immediately I found myself scrambling to get the smoke out before it all became too intense to endure. As soon as the smoke entered my lungs, I witnessed the objects around me tear apart from their halos, leaving neon streaks of electromagnetism hanging in the air around them, which stuck in place and then shrank as though being pulled by expansion into the vastness of space. At this point, I remembered it. Not from any experiential account that I can recall per se, but more from a primal, instinctive perspective. I knew what was happening, and all that I could say before collapsing on the floor was, "Oh." The sound of my voice droned out into the rapidly shuffling distance, as a wave of electrical vapour swelled into a tsunami that came flooding in from the right of me, and all that I could do to keep from being swallowed was to drop onto my back and close my eyes in an attempt to escape the chaos that was suddenly ensuing all around me. I witnessed then, without eyes to see, the ceiling and walls of the room transform and inflate with a weightless force into an enormous dome of prisms resembling diamond eyeballs, peering in at me from the edge of the world while radiating rainbow coronas in every direction. It was as though the living room had become this great museum of spectacles that had always been there just beyond my ability to perceive, and had now been revealed, ephemerally, for me to partake of. I felt that though I could observe the museum from a singular point within the museum, that somehow I, at the same time, am the museum. I wanted ever so desperately to exacerbate how amazing it was in vivid detail, but all that I could manage was, "I can't freaking explain it, I don't even know what to do with myself here." And that was when the shifting began. Suddenly, everything was tumbling and folding into itself, much like what I have experienced with Salvia in the past. However, the difference is that this time, I was still me, and was able to see what was actually happening. The gravity was shifting, but not without deliberation. The very rules that make up the game of life were being rapidly changed ever so slightly by some alien persona, very concisely. It was as though the function of the existential machine depended upon the shuffling of these values. When I use the term alien, I do not mean extraterrestrial, I mean truly alien, inconceivable, something entirely unknowable. Again, this conception is totally congruent with my experience of salvia. However, again, this time I can actually maneuver, and so I move towards the edge of the dome, where I find a strange man standing in the corner, manipulating pulleys and levers as though he's running the stage arrangement for some grand play. He works the mechanisms in the corner while turning his gaze around to me, smiling wildly. He looks eerily similar to Two-Face from Batman, and even appears two-dimensional, like a comic book character. I think of him as being the museum's curator. I can remember thinking, this guy's obnoxious, before making my way back to the museum showroom in the centre of the dome. Upon reaching said area, I found myself standing in the living room again. Effervescent clouds of colour streaming from the walls into the vastness, surrounding like a cacophony of vacuums oscillating infinitely. I could then just begin to hear disjointed ramblings approaching. It was a myriad of sounds collecting into small bunches that made up little symphonies. Each one was a different genre of music entirely, and sounded quite discordant uniquely, but altogether, the differing music created a larger orchestra, and I could just barely make out the melody. The song was beautiful beyond words, yet still, I could not stand the madness. The rules were continuing to shift, the gravity continuing to fold, and I feared, yet again, that I would be lost forever. Looking over towards the couch, I see Boob sitting straight up with his eyes fixed on me, and for the first time since the initial puff, I can feel my own eyes and how wide they are. I must have appeared positively frightening at the time. When I see him, I get the feeling that I am viewing a mirror of some kind, and I am relieved that he is present. My exact thoughts at the time were, I'm cool, that's Boob right there, that's Boob. I'm Boob. I'm Boob. I'm not Boob. Have I been Boob this whole time? And all of a sudden, I'm someone else. I have been the entire time. Then who is Donovan, I wondered. This riddle was humongous and encompassing. Everyone that I knew was in the room at this point, all going about separate businesses. I just couldn't see them if I tried to look. I could feel them though, because I was them. Residual memory, I told myself, but it was my brother, so who was me? The rules continued to fluctuate, not immensely, but just enough to keep us all confused. The curator continues to meddle obnoxiously, but not without reason. I reach to my left and feel the leg of the coffee table. Suddenly, I am back in the living room again. Boob notices the change in my demeanour and asks me if I've returned. I think so, is all I can honestly tell him. There is still a very conceivable current of electricity snaking its way throughout the room, but for all intents and purposes, I am me again, and I am lucid. I tell Boob that I think I have to vomit and begin walking into the bathroom. Immediately upon entering, I recognise a strong feeling of nostalgia sweeping over me like excessive deja vu. I've been here before, I said to myself, and for whatever reason, it seemed so very sad and desperate, as if I'd been there forever. The area repeatedly assembled itself in patterns befitting its character, and I felt as though I was standing backstage at the show of all things alone. After attempting to gag myself into vomiting a few times in hopes of relieving myself somewhat, I looked into the mirror and saw that I was me, truly, and not some other person. And suddenly, I sobered. I walk into the living room and smoke a cigarette while trying to accurately relate my experience to Boob. The next morning, we ate the mushrooms with the intention of playing a 2-player role-playing game while tripping. No more than half an hour in, and I was no longer cognitive. I had absolutely no idea what we were doing or what in the hell the point of any of it was. So I stopped playing and we began to watch a television show. Immediately, I recognised the embossed quality of the picture from the last time I'd ingested psilocybin, whereat myself and a good friend of mine sat here all night laughing hysterically at a British television show about survivors of an earthly holocaust rebuilding humanity on a barren planet, and I suspected that we'd experience the same type of trip as then, mild and unproductive. I was wrong. Within an hour or so, the entire room had taken on this very distant quality, like the walls of an aquarium, right there, yet so far away, and the objects in my environment were floating on a tide, as though the ocean had swept into the room and overtaken things. The cat was being a grouch in the corner. I was finding this all very amusing and enthusing, until I find myself awakening to the realization that Boob and I had been sitting here doing all of this together for ages, forever even. It was like we were the first two people in the Garden of Eden, waiting throughout eternity for each other to wake up from this crazy dream that we've been having. I felt as though he knew every intimate detail of my life, and in this nakedness, I felt ashamed and scared. I felt as though I needed to retreat. I couldn't bring myself to embrace the extreme unity of this relationship. I could not face this reconciliation yet. I had to run away and hide in waiting. I felt so stupid that I had been doing this for so long. The whole world knew as well. Everyone that had ever been was pointing and laughing at me because I created this insane illusion to hide myself from my closest friend. A voice is telling me to get up. At first, it seems like a motivator, telling me to get up and make a better life for myself, create a better me. But then, it begins to twist and turn, seeming more like a first responder finding my body on the ground and begging me to be alright. I begin to think that maybe I really have been in some horrible accident, and this is someone trying to revive me. Get up! You have to get up! I open my eyes to find that it is indeed a person speaking to an unconscious body, on the television that is. Damn, that was freaky, I tell Boob, who is hiding under a blanket on the couch. We both come to, and decide to take another shot at playing the video game. We run our characters in circles and stare at the clouds, laughing and exclaiming how very awesome everything looks for about 15 minutes, before throwing our controls to the floor and laughing at them as well. I feel as if I am at the peak of something now, just close enough to reach higher, and so I suggest taking another hit of the DMT. Of course, my brother isn't into it. I think he's afraid. But I don't let that deter me, and I take a hit of what remains in the pipe from yesterday. It greatly enhances the trip, but does little else. Nothing worth mentioning here at least. Later on that night, I take another hit with a very good friend of mine who cannot partake of other drugs due to enforced legal parameters, and we got high together, and that was about the gist of it. It was a very fun night, but nothing exceptional beyond what I've already mentioned. At any rate, disappointed with not having returned to the fantastic museum the night before, I waited until early in the morning the next day to try one last time, as our resources had grown slim, and my brother hadn't taken his chance yet. I could remember distinctly having felt as though I were fighting the trip the first time, and that I needed to relax in order to experience it fully. It just so happened that the wine had been left over from the first night, and all seemed to be perfectly aligned. I drank the wine slowly as I watched videos on the internet of people relating their own experiences with the drug, in order to build myself up to the moment. It was an extremely beautiful young lady that described it, to the best of her abilities, having seen angels in her visions that finally pushed me over the edge, and I packed up probably a little more than I should have. I took a long, slow drag of the pipe, and immediately I recognised having made the same mistake again. Now, I cannot fully remember what happened here as of yet, but I can tell you that I was scared beyond my wits upon awakening from it. I recall having become a two-dimensional black and white zigzag pattern, and remaining that way for quite some time. I felt as though others were watching from somewhere, though from where exactly I could not tell, as I was existing in a two-dimensional universe. I do remember a gigantic face somewhere, a woman's face made of rainbow colours. She was watching me, and it seemed as though she had always been watching me, but I simply had not noticed until now. Though she seemed complacent, I felt as though she was happy that I had recognised her. During this episode, I lost consciousness at some point, and had very vivid dreams wherein my brother failed to relate to me his experiences with DMT several times over the course of a full week's worth of time, even though he had not even really tried it yet. After which, I awakened to my brother getting up very early in the morning, which led me to believe that I had skipped a day and that we had to go to work immediately, which had scared me quite a bit. All in all, it was a seemingly eventless experience, but I do feel that the insights are apparent, and I am extremely grateful to have been a part of it. Until next time. Eternal Dance of Beautiful Nothingness. A DMT and cannabis trip report, posted by Quantigy to Irid.org on September 14th, 2010. Let me preface this account by saying that I've had many previous experiences with psychedelics, which I believe properly prepared me for my very first DMT trip. This experience occurred this past weekend at the gathering of the Vibes Music Festival in Bridgeport, Connecticut. My friend and I were fortunate enough to find a dealer in the campsite who not only had some very kind dope, but also DMT, of which we purchased a half gram. Over the course of the last few months, I'd been avidly reading about DMT experiences and was very curious and excited to try it for myself. My plan was to trip on mushrooms that evening and try the DMT earlier the following day. That night, while shrooming, I made a conscious effort to continuously direct strong, positive thoughts towards myself and my place in the universe. I was hoping to cultivate a strong, positive experience with the DMT the next day, as I'd read of people having very difficult experiences with the drug at times. The next day rolls around, and my friend and I find a spot on the beach, directly across from the Green Vibe stage, where one musical act was ending and other beginning to tune up. I sat back in a lawn chair, facing Long Island Sound, and proceeded to prepare my pipe. I was somewhat concerned, because I'd read many people's accounts of the proper way to smoke DMT, water pipes, vaporizers, butane lighters, etc., and I had none of those things, only a very small glass piece and a run-of-the-mill lighter. Still, I could not help but be aware at this point of a strong sense of purpose around what I was about to attempt. It was palpable. This feeling that I was supposed to be right here, right now. Using the tip of a pen cap, I measured very approximately around 10 to 15 milligrams of the brownish yellow powder onto the weed in my piece. And then, I covered it with another small bud. Since I had no idea what to expect, I gave my friend very simple instructions. Number 1, take the piece from me when I finish. And 2, if I appear to be in any kind of distress, say nothing, just hold my hand. The wind coming off the water was strong, and so I pulled the towel over my head and lit up. I lit the bowl slowly, drawing a deep breath and holding the smoke in my lungs for about 20 to 30 seconds. Upon exhalation, I tasted pot and nothing else. I waited about 2 minutes, and while I was definitely stoned, I knew I hadn't gotten a good enough hit of the DMT. I asked my friend to sprinkle in some more, and thankfully, he instead suggested I try one more hit first. So I hit it again, and this time, I instantly became aware of a sharp, acrid flavour filling my lungs and nostrils. Believing I'd hit gold, I took in as much smoke as possible and held it for a full 30 seconds before exhaling. I slumped back in my lawn chair and took note of the clear, cloud-stickled sky. About 5 seconds after laying back, I became aware of a kind of film drawing down over my vision. I recall thinking at the time that it looked like several large parameciums had landed on my eyeballs. They undulated and slid with ease, slippery living pools of near-invisible protoplasm, speckled and busy indeed. I watched the clouds and sky from behind this odd, primordial curtain, and then became aware of a warm numbness cascading down my cheeks and throat. My heart was beating rapidly, and I knew I was on my way. There was no fear at this time, yet there was this idea of fear. Fear floated over to the right side of my consciousness, and I sensed its selfish desire to assert itself. Instead, I turned my attention away, and to the sounds of the band still tuning up on stage. I knew that once the music began, the fear would not have the resources to stick around me, and I would be on my way towards something wonderful. The band seemed to take forever to launch into a song though. I was aware that the noise of the frontman going on and on about how good it is to be here on this beautiful Friday, etc., etc., had taken on a deep, vibrating quality. It was as if the sound was being picked up and amplified not in my eardrums, but in the very centre of my body, and travelling outward from within. My heart began to beat faster, and the thought that this band may never play a song allowed the fear to draw in closer and begin to take hold. It was at this time that the music finally exploded out into the air, and I experienced a blast off. The numbness that had begun on my face quickly cascaded down the rest of me, and I was separated entirely from my physical form. I closed my eyes, but the sky with its glorious clouds remained, but then began to shift and split as a series of brightly coloured spiral fractals spun down from beyond the sky. The lines of this fractal were thin, and clearly something small within them, too tiny to see, was moving as well. The cloud and sky space between the fractal lines suddenly darkened and began to pulse with a sickly purple bruised colour. I understood that this was the fear that was still travelling right along with me. The only part of my body that remained was my heart, which I became sure would soon explode. And then there was a voice. I use the word voice in the loosest sense, for what I really experienced was the knowing of another given to me. I heard it audibly, but felt it just as clearly and simultaneously saw the message as it unfurled on a bright white banner that drew itself across the sick, purple fear expanse, its edges attaching each one of the pretty fractal spirals. Written on the banner, clear as day, was the message, "You have taken a powerful psychedelic." This message, experienced visually, audibly, and within my consciousness, was undoubtedly female. There was no tone to lend it a friendly or unfriendly disposition. It was simply supplying me with information. I continued to soar forward. Another banner, voice, feeling, delivered by this female voice shot across my consciousness. It said, "We want to see you, but you have to slow down your breathing first. Take deep breaths." Upon receiving this advice, I was aware of a new presence of mind within me. While I was primarily in a state of heightened wonder and no small degree of panic, what rose up within me was a kind of no-nonsense, cold rationality that initiated within me a deep, rhythmic breathing exercise that I practiced often in meditation. As I breathed, the pulsing, sick, purple masses of fear began to dissipate, while the spiral lines grew thicker and expanded outwards. I picked up speed and was very, very faintly aware that far below where my body sat, a strong ocean wind was blowing against my face. Suddenly, I became aware of shapes that were attempting to break through the multicoloured surface of the fractal spirals. There was a pushing upwards, until finally, out popped a small, perfectly spherical and bright green head. It spun and smiled wide at me. Two of its eyes were just slits of hilarity, before fully popping out of the surface and began to dance along with the music. Then I spotted another, and then another, and soon the spiral fractal completed its formation of an endless tunnel, made up completely of these green dancing men. I was familiar with the accounts of machine elves, but these looked more like the Doozers from Fraggle Rock, which some of you might remember. They danced in unison and began to speak to me. "Hooray, you made it! We're so glad you're here. We've been waiting for you to find us again." I simply marvelled at this, and was distantly aware that back on Earth, my body was laughing. Every so often, a sickly purple head would pop out of the fractal, and suddenly there would be an angry little man, with a frown made of pure electricity. He would stare at me and say something profoundly distressing like, "Now you're dying. You're going insane forever. Your best friend hates you." However, before any real fear could gather itself, one or more of the happy green men would surround the purple guy and kick or karate chop him off the fractal and into a dark centre that was slowly revealing itself at the centre of everything. As they did this, they would say things like, "Oh, don't listen to him, he's just confused. He'll come back understanding better the next time. You're doing great. Hooray." I became suddenly aware of a tremendous insight into what I was actually experiencing. This insight was presented to me, again, through several mediums at once. I was being told it by the green men, I was seeing the truth of it in the pattern materialise before me, as though the mere existence of this image ensured it was true, as well as being struck by a strong familiarity from the experience as a whole. The insight was this. This was the force of the universe, of creation, of everything. It's continuously moving, working itself into higher and higher degrees of consciousness. The images before me were just that, images, created by my mind to give form to what is essentially formless. The green men illustrated this last point by suddenly looking at me and saying, "We can be whatever you want, we can be chipmunks," and then they became chipmunks. "We can be fire hydrants as well," and they all became fire hydrants. None of it matters. It doesn't matter. Hooray. And then returned to little green men. I understood that this dancing, this moving, was really them working towards the higher consciousness, and that back on Earth this gleeful dancing manifested in the acts of kindness, love, and generosity of people towards each other. I understood that our physical reality, including the notions of time and space, was merely a reflection caused by the vibrating energy of this process, and was not real in any sense of the word. The true nature of everything was vibration, and it emanated and danced around a singular point of nothingness. This nothingness, I came to understand, was all there ever was or ever will be. However, the notion of nothing naturally implies the idea of something, and that is what we truly are. The implication of possibility generated by the truth of utter nothingness. As if to demonstrate this point, I was shown snapshots of events from throughout my life, from infant years to events from that very day. The picture of the event, say for example, the birth of my daughter or me falling off the slide in 3rd grade, would fill my field of vision. Then it would freeze like a snapshot, and grown smaller and smaller, until the spiral fractal tunnel returned from the snapshot that was being held in the hands by one of the green men, and then they would toss it back into the nothingness. See? It's just a picture. Hooray. This is all that's real. Us. You. The concepts of us and me, and the very concept of separation as a whole, suddenly manifested itself as a giant billboard, and that too was snapshotted and tossed away into the nothing. This is all it is. Everything is one. You are it. Everyone is. This is it. This insight was celebrated by a massive hooray by the green men, and then they went on to say things like, "It's so simple. Yeah, you see it now. We're so glad you see it. It's you. It's everything." Then they all began to simultaneously don these black graduation caps and gowns. They removed a certificate of graduation from behind them, stamped it, signed it, and then held it up to me while giving me a big thumbs up. "Okay, it's back to work we go. Let's go. Hooray." The spiral tunnel gradually began to slow and grow thinner. From behind this vision, I began to make out the frail outlines of clouds and sky. The music continued to jam on, and my fingers began to tap the arms of the lawn chair. I was returning to my body. With my eyes now open, I could still see the little green men, who continued to dance in circles behind the sky. Faintly, they cried, "Come back again soon. We're always here. We'd love to see you. Good job today. Hooray." I sat up and looked at my friend, who promptly said, 15 minutes? You were there for 15 minutes? The very notion of time was still absurd to me, as I still felt primarily within the reality of the spiral truth, as opposed to the physical realm. This euphoric feeling of belonging and beauty remained with me throughout the weekend, though the exact nature and profound sense of truth and familiarity of the experience has begun to fade away. I have, however, continued to have had faint closed-eye visuals as late as last night, 2 days later. This account I came up with is the best I could surmise and approximate the experience. I cannot wait to go back there again and see some more. Mother Spirit Awaits. A DMT trip report by Universal Shaman. Posted to irwid.org, September 28, 2004. It's been a few weeks now since my first encounter with DMT. Something long awaited and highly anticipated, but which completely transcended any expectations I had of it. I'd read a lot of McKenna's rants about self-transforming machine elves, the Amazon shamans helping spirits and ancestors, and friends had told me about gnomes in giant stat cats running around in a fully psychedelic playground. No matter how much I heard about the alien intelligence encounters, I kept putting them aside as interpretations that colour and play off of each other. Like one person says they encountered aliens, and so the next person interprets their own trip in a similar way, which creates a chain of influence over every next tripper. However, I did expect something alien, something that I could recognise as alien, something sci-fi or fantastical, like a psychedelic Star Trek. I couldn't have been further from the fact of the matter. I was at a friend's house organising some other drug-related circumstances. It came up that he had a bit of DMT left and asked me if I was interested in trying some. Absolutely not. So we got in the car and drove to a place he recommended tripping at. Up in the hills, in a national park, which was a 5-minute walk through scrub into a secluded forest area. During the walk we talked about the feeling of the place, noting that there was a distinct pagan ritual site feel about the area, a kind of overarching, all-seeing watchful presence about the environment. It was peaceful, clear-skied, and fairly shady and cool. In retrospect, I'm sure this comfortable place influenced the quality of the DMT flash. I had 2 attempts about 15 minutes apart, because the first was noticeably not a peak experience, but was a good introduction to the totally alien nature of the DMT visions. Taking in the first toke, around 25 milligrams, I began to notice weird body sensations. My trunk became slightly elongated, and everything was surging with an energy that was totally silent to the ears, like a raging river in my mind. My heart felt like it was about to burst through my ribcage as I reached the peak of the inhalation. I let out a single laugh as I began to exhale, partly because the sensations were awesome, not unlike the body rushes of mushrooms, but it was mostly just ecstatic that DMT molecules were finally having their way with my mind. I closed my eyes and was immediately face to face with a supreme being of sorts. It had no face, and its form was like a string of multicoloured lights constantly morphing, like a clown making a series of balloon animals, beginning with a dog, which he then alters a couple of parts of, holds it differently to reveal a dolphin, and so on and so forth. It was certainly a living presence, and without a face it was still somehow staring eye to eye with me as though it knew everything about my entire life. There was no sense of emotional attachment, but there was definitely a supralinguistic communication happening. This being and I were travelling at great speed through an infinite stretch of deep space. I was chasing it. It stayed the same distance away from me the whole time and seemed to be at ease with the speed, while I was struggling to keep up. It was as though it wanted me there, but not yet. Not in this way. It was telling me to come back when I could keep up with it, when I could catch up and pass straight through. Maybe this was the membrane that separates the being's world of mine, the chrysanthemum that McKenna described. The being zoomed away and the effects started to fade, leaving me in a blissful kind of luminescent state that surpassed any notion of Zen state or meditative bliss. The real world had become indescribably fresh and crystal clear, all while I had my eyes closed. And 15 minutes later, the second attempt was around twice the dose of the first, which began just the same, the visual environment becoming kind of fuzzy and my body seemed to be spaghettifying just slightly. But within seconds of this, there was a distinct difference. I'd only heard this described in other people's accounts once, I think, and I'd totally forgotten about the possibility of it happening until it actually happened to me. So just after I released the toke, I looked around to see what was happening to my senses as I was coming up, when the entire universe began to buzz. It was like a deep bass feedback loop that you sometimes hear in electronic music, like the humming noise of flying saucers in movies that's very electronic and computer-like. But it was unbelievably real and right there, all around me. I immediately thought that the DMT had unlocked a whole new realm of sound that we don't normally hear. A background kind of sound that would distract our ears from normal functioning. the sound that matter makes. I've perceived the vibrations of matter and subatomic particles on other trips, such as mushrooms and acid, and once or twice even on the old hooch. But now with DMT, it was a totally audible reality. And more than just audible, this sharp bassy hum that was coming out of everything made everything vibrate, including myself and my sitter next to me. It was so intense and pervasive that I had to close my eyes to escape the motion sickness of this vibrating mass of existence. When I did, the buzz began to mutate and break up into all these telephonic, electronic modem-like noises, like a kaleidoscope of sound. The sounds built and built, reaching a peak that culminated in a vortex, which sucked everything in existence, the buzzing, the environment around me, and my entire being into a totally foreign dimension. And there I was, with total silence. The buzzing was gone, and I was in a room looking at a wall. The wall was like a complete scaffold of constantly morphing angular prisms, shimmering with colours that are completely beyond the descriptions of any language, and totally awe-inspiring. I felt an uncontrollable smile grow across my face. Reality check. But I kept watching. I immediately noticed that there was something more than just the wall. I noticed at first there was something in the wall popping out occasionally to show me it was there. It wanted me to recognise it before it would fully come out though. It was something like watching the flat surface of a calm beach and seeing a dolphin periodically break the surface for air. When I recognised that there was definitely something living, swimming through this scaffold of unbelievable shapes and colours, it finally came out. It was a non-human female being, flying around this hyperdimensional room of sorts. She wore a flowing cape or gown that streamed directly off a big round glowing face, the kind of face that a 3-year-old kid draws, a circle with dots for eyes and a curved line for a mouth. And that's really all there was of her. But her face was so alive, so compassionate, and so enlightened. She was very happy when I realised she was there as well. Then, I watched as a pedestal literally grew out of the floor of this room, made of the same unearthly super brilliant scaffolding. My attention must have been distracted by this thing growing out of the ground, because the female being got in my face and communicated to me, not in words I might add. "Look at what's on the pedestal." I looked up and saw a diamond-shaped object that was made of similar stuff to the walls, but infinitely more brilliant, more dazzling, more unspeakably awesome. And as my smile grew, total awe and amazement filled me, and this female being began flying around the object at great speed, keeping her eyes fixed on me the whole time. She was doing flips and sharp turns and cheering as though she was celebrating the fact that she had the chance to show me whatever this was. She kept communicating to me. Look at it, isn't this awesome?" This continued, and I kept my eyes on that unbelievable object as the scene began to fade. I started to become aware of my hands folded in my lap. They were slightly sweaty, and my body was on an up and full of energy, just as my mind began to return to the reality of sitting in a forest setting, next to the person who had just initiated me into yet another, but easily the most awesome, dimension of conscious reality. I was left feeling unusually happy for at least a week after that experience. It has also left me with a profound sense of fulfillment and far greater purpose and perspective in my life's quest to understand the nature of this human existence. From these experiences, I have to say that DMT is quite patently the most accessible of the deep psychedelic states, and in terms of the practical, empirical analysis of one's own shamanic journeys, this is by far the easiest landscape to traverse that I've encountered. Mushrooms require a huge amount of dedication and spiritual preparation, weeks and months for the most rewarding outcomes. They also require massive amounts of attention, a great deal of energy to keep myself at least partly detached from the emotional roller coasters that the mushroom state can draw me into. And this is particularly because of the extended time of the trips. The same goes for powerful acid experiences and other indole hallucinogens. I say this not because DMT is so short-acting, but because on a proper dose of DMT, one's being is thrust into a peak experience. There really is no choice in the matter. On mushrooms or acid, one must guide his or her own thoughts and emotions through precarious unknown landscapes, and even then a peak experience is not guaranteed. DMT, however, seems to serve a peak experience on a platter with a salad on the side. I knew from the moment I started toking to when I found myself in another dimensional room. I knew this was right. The DMT wanted me there, and it took me there. All I had to do was receive it graciously. Blue by You, a DMT trip report by Blue Boy, posted to earwid.org, March 21st, 2004. So several years ago, I experimented with DMT. I was introduced to this chemical through a friend of mine who is heavily into shamanism. Over a 12-month period, I smoked it 4 times with ever-increasing doses. My friend recommended that I work my way up to the spirit dose. Now, this was wise because even in smaller doses, it can be a frightening experience. But on my 5th journey, I finally found them. Or more accurately, they found me. I've since read accounts from McKenna and Strassman's subjects. I guess my experience was similar, though I didn't perceive myself as being inside a structure. Rather, it seemed that the spirits were all around me. Wherever I looked, the swirling patterns transmogrified into these oscillating things which clearly acted independently of my own thoughts. At least that was the overwhelming perception I had. I can't really describe them. They were infinite in their complexity. I can see why people are convinced that they are entities separate from their own minds. It's inconceivable that anyone can imagine such. I don't know what you'd actually call them or it. Anyway, I was there, wherever the hell that was, and all of a sudden each one of my fingers was connected to a spirit. So here's where it gets really strange. There were thousands of them near me now, and millions in the distance, though if I looked at the distant ones, they then zoomed up close. So the next thing I know, each hand has thousands of fingers on them. I had complete control over each one as well. A bit like how I can move our left index finger, I could completely control left finger 40,624. It was like I was a conductor of sorts. They were dancing and flying around in accordance with what I did with my super hands. Sound and sight would merge and shift. I was quite literally conducting an orchestra of millions. There was a lot of other stuff too, but I've never been able to recall it. My final memories being in absolute nothingness except for one spirit. As I looked at it, it started to oscillate, so I was looking at myself, or what I perceived was myself. I was changing form 1,000 times a second. The oscillations became faster and the spirit wanted to know who it was. Now, this wasn't asked in words, but I knew what the question was, somehow. Well, I don't know, I said. This conversation went back and forth at an ever greater speed, until at the same time we were both saying, "He is you, he is you," and then the words would converge into just hue. Literally, it was blue. I mean, I became the colour blue itself. It was a psychedelic play on words. I was a frequency, and then this spirit rushed up to the room from me from the other side of the galaxy, laughing. He had a present, like a normal box with a blue ribbon, and he said, "What's your favourite hue?" So next thing I knew, I'd opened my eyes. The extra freaky element was that I had turned my head around and was looking straight out the window at, well, you guessed it, a big clear blue sky. Now, once I'd met them, or myself, perhaps, well, I certainly don't ascribe to the literal idea that DMT is conducive to contacting aliens. Well, after all this, I decided not to do DMT again. I've experienced total and absolute fucking out there, and I'd be scared that if I did it again, I wouldn't quite make it back entirely. I don't think that there could be a more intense experience imaginable. However, I never imagined I'd experience what I did either. It is amazing, but a word of caution. This isn't a fun party drug at all. Some people want to go skydiving, and that's cool, but this was like being a Super Bowl bouncing around the universe itself. At the time of going through all this, it really was too much. And the final freakiness? At certain times of the morning or afternoon, I'd look up at the sky and get this déjà vu feeling. It's just the right shade of blue. Observed and Observer melded together. A DMT trip report by Megan, posted to earwid.org June 14th, 2021. So after 20 years of desperately wanting to try the mysterious and elusive DMT, I finally figured out how to obtain some. The package arrived and I fished out a small baggie of light yellow powder. Interestingly, I was expecting it to be white. I immediately tested it. All good, thankfully. So I weighed it out and put all but my 50mg dose into a glass jar, since I heard that plastic could degrade the substance if left in too long. I lacked the correct smoking setup, so I resorted to the sandwich method of layering the powder between ashes in my regular glass weed bowl. I was satisfied that everything was ready and rushed to my bedroom in excitement. This was it. The day had finally arrived. Was I going to meet the famous machine elves? Was I going to astrally fly to outer space? Or was I going to learn the secrets of the universe? Well, either way, I couldn't wait to find out. It was early evening and dark outside. I turned on low ambient lighting, switched off my phone and laid on my bed. The room was entirely silent. I was full of anticipation and a bit of trepidation. I flicked the lighter and took care to only lightly touch the top layer of ash as to vaporize the powder. I took a deep drag and automatically tried to stem the rising smoke from the bowl before I was ready to take the second hit. The effects hit me like a freight train within 2 to 3 seconds in a most unexpected manner. My surroundings exploded into a bright fractal that reminded me of colourful Hindu-type designs. I also felt this light body load sweep over me that seemed to originate from the upper chest. Shocked, I hurried to take the second hit, worried that I would become too impaired to operate the pipe if I waited a moment longer. I never did quite make it to the intended third hit. My consciousness had left the building completely by that point. But I did enter what I can only describe as a waking dreamlike state. I didn't feel the sensation leaving my body. I just seamlessly blipped into another reality entirely. There was nothing notable or distinctive about this place though. My previous reality was instantly forgotten, although I retained a measure of ability to form distinctive thoughts. Was this some sort of waiting area or holding room? In contrast to the brightly pulsating fractals from moments earlier, I now only saw a whitish grey fog everywhere. I was also keenly aware of a benevolent or perhaps neutral entity leaning over me, looking down on me, calmly inspecting me. I couldn't quite make out any distinct features, and the entity did not speak to me really. But I felt completely calm, patient, and a bit curious as to what it was doing. I understood only after the trip was done that this was the gatekeeper who would direct my journey, because I soon blipped again and everything changed drastically a second time. So then the ability to form thoughts dissolved away. I was no longer me, and it didn't matter because I'd forgotten about me. Well, forgot is a poor description, because that indicates mental faculties to begin with, and I had none. I was no longer a person, and had no concept or care of what a person even was. I also had no human emotions, and no human thoughts. All that really existed was a deep sense of peace and contentment. It was the ultimate, ideal state of being. In other words, the awareness that was once me was individually conscious, but very much not an individual. Now, this was clearly ego death, and probably something even far beyond that. People sometimes describe ego death as terrifying, but how can you be terrified if you're no longer a being that experiences human emotions? So you know what, I'm not quite sure what this was at all, aside from a complete 100% transformation. The transition from a complicated and chaotic human individual to a simple electrical charge was smooth and seamless. I peacefully existed as an energetic building block of whatever plane of existence I was transported to, and it was perfect. Time didn't exist here, and my awareness had always been there and always would be. My very essence undulated and flowed this way and that, weightless, and riding invisible waves over vast, vast distances. I just quietly dwelt, devoid of thought, and in a state of bliss for all of eternity. There were no entities here, just as I was not an entity. It was nothing but a perfect, fluidly shifting and endless sea of harmoniously vibrating energy. So as the DMT began to wear off, I gradually became aware of my human body. What? I gasped, and my hand flew up and touched my face. Oh no. This was my first thought. I was thinking again, and it was weird and jarring. It was something like being woken from a peaceful sleep by someone rudely dumping a bucket of ice water on your bed, but 1,000 times worse. Then, sobering up very swiftly, I remembered everything. My human life on Earth. I was Megan. I remembered her now. I'd taken drugs? No, this was such a cruel development. This wasn't fair at all. My real life was back there, in the blissful sea. To say that being suddenly burdened with human consciousness again was a disappointment would be the understatement of the millennia. It may sound like I'm a normally depressed person, or that I hate myself or something, the way I describe my great sadness and sense of loss at returning to my human self. But honestly, that isn't the case. It's key to the story to include that. In all honesty, my life isn't any more horrible than the average person's. In retrospect, I find it quite curious that transitioning into a bolt of electricity was seamless and unnoticeable, but transitioning back to what's supposed to be my normal self felt unnatural, to the point of minor impending doom. It was also hard to wrap my head around the fact that I'd only been out for 10 minutes, as opposed to the feeling of timelessness I experienced in the sea of harmony. I truly cannot wait to go back, but I know instinctively that it's not something that should be done casually or for mere escapism. I respect it far too much for that. I have no doubt that I was in a real place that exists somewhere out there, but I'm not sure if DMT is for everyone. What I mean by this is if you're looking to party and get lit, this is really not the right substance for that, and I could see it going sideways pretty badly if someone went into it with that mindset, as the gatekeeper may not take it very kindly.